Welcome to the fantasy audiobook. Sailing. Heaven-Defying, second in command of the Straw Hat Pirates. Chapter 1. East Blue, Windmill Village. The beautiful blue sky, seagulls fly freely. As the cool sea breeze brushed across his cheeks, a little kid in open crotch pants on the edge of the cliff was shouting at the unconscious young figure at the bottom of the cliff with a worried look on his face. Beos. It's over, it's over, Beos must have fallen to death. I should have known not to let Beos go down to get the bird eggs. How can I explain this to Makino when I go back? Hearing the shouts in his ears, Lorraine opened his heavy eyelids, slowly struggled to sit up from the pain all over his body, and felt the scorching sun above his head. He looked around the cliffs, reefs and endless sea around him. All this seemed out of tune with his original memory. Where is this? Why am I lying on the coast? Hiss. Along with the severe pain from the brain, the original owner's memories kept emerging for a while. I didn't expect that in reality, the epidemic had just been lifted, and I finally came out to relax. I just picked up 2 beautiful girls in the bar, so I didn't have time to enjoy it. When I walked out of the bar, there was a bang, and I felt a black head. When I woke up, I occupied the body of this kid named Beos. Lorraine covered his head, which was gradually fading away from the pain, and his face began to become shocked, muttering to himself in dissatisfaction. One Piece world. Hey, are you kidding me? Although I have written One Piece novels, I have never imagined that I would personally travel through time and space. It's cold. This is a world where people eat people. With my short arms and legs, anyone can cut me into pieces. Although I loved watching One Piece anime in my previous life, I held a pot bun in each hand. Pot bun, what 3-sword flow secret, and it sounded so passionate. But that was only in the anime, and now I am experiencing it in person. Is this because I am afraid that I will not die fast enough? Thinking of this, Lorraine's face showed a look of despair. Just when Lorraine was stunned, the little kid with a runny nose standing on the edge of the cliff saw Lorraine wake up. Beos, I'll save you now. Step. His face was full of joy, and he jumped down without caring about so much. Who is calling the name of this body? Hearing the voice coming from the cliff above his head, Lorraine, who was originally stunned, subconsciously looked up. Wait, don't jump down. The next second, his whole face was frightened and he tried to avoid the black shadow falling from his head, but it was too late. Bang. I'm going to kill you. Ha. I knew Beos wouldn't be so short-lived. Bang bang bang. Accompanied by a violent collision and screams, only the sound of seawater hitting the coast was heard around. The camera went to the windmill village. There was a bustling sound coming from a tavern, which was full of pirates drinking happily. Sitting at the bar, there was a man wearing a white shirt, cropped pants, red hair and a straw hat. With his chin supported by his left hand and a wine glass in his right hand, he looked around the tavern but did not see the 2 little brats. He subconsciously felt a little uncomfortable and asked the tavern owner Makino in front of him with a little doubt. Why didn't I see Luffy and Beos today? As Shanks finished speaking, Usopp, Lachi Lu, and Lime Jones, who were drinking behind him, echoed. I was thinking, why do I feel like something is missing today? I just noticed that little Luffy and little Beos are not here. Yes, by the way, the boss lady, the 2 little brats, little Luffy and little Beos, are not in the tavern to help us serve wine. Where did they go to be lazy? Quote. Makino, who was wiping his wine glass, heard red-haired Shanks and others asking about Luffy. Beos was subconsciously stunned, then smiled. The 2 of them went to the back mountain to play early in the morning. Now it's noon, I think they will be back soon. Bang. Just as Makino finished speaking, the door of the tavern was pushed open, and 2 little brats less than 1 meter tall ran in one after another. They were little Luffy and Beos. Hey, Beos, I didn't mean to hit you just now, and you didn't beat me up, so just be magnanimous and forgive me. I promise I won't do it next time. Quote. Little Luffy, who was beaten into a pig-like face, didn't notice the red-hair pirates at all, and continued to chase little Beos and beg for forgiveness. Beos glanced at little Luffy behind him with a bad temper, covered the big bump on his head that was hit by little Luffy, ran to the room to find medicine to reduce swelling, and digested the original owner's memory in his mind. Stop. I want to be quiet. Little Luffy looked at Beos slamming the door, and suddenly showed a face full of disappointment. He subconsciously sat down at the bar and said with his head down, "Makino, give me a glass of wine." The red hair pirates, who had witnessed the conflict between Luffy and Beos, stopped playing and drinking. But when they heard that little Luffy wanted a glass of wine, the originally quiet tavern was suddenly covered by violent laughter. "Ha ha ha ha, did you hear it? Little Luffy said he wanted to drink. Ha ha ha, I laughed to death." Quote, red-haired Shanks, who was also sitting at the bar, was also amused by what little Luffy said and laughed wildly, as if tears were flowing down. "Ha ha ha ha, what kind of wine is a little brat drinking?" Listening to the laughter of the whole bar and Shanks's look of asking for a beating, little Luffy gritted his teeth and said unconvinced, "I'm not a little brat, I'm grown up." Shanks held back his laughter and put a glass of juice in front of little Luffy while comforting him. "Okay, don't be angry, come and drink this glass of juice." "Ah, thank you." Little Luffy subconsciously took the juice handed by Shanks, took a sip from the straw, and showed satisfaction on his face. "Ha ha ha ha, see, it's clearly a little brat." Seeing this, Shanks couldn't hold it back any longer, and laughed while patting the bar and pointing at little Luffy. "Too despicable, Shanks." Quote, little Luffy reacted and stood on the chair, yelling at Shanks, who was still clapping his hands and laughing wildly. Ha 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 ha. At the same time, this scene also caused all the red hair pirates behind him to burst into laughter. Little Luffy was so angry that he gritted his teeth and yelled at the red hair pirates, "You are not allowed to laugh, especially you Shanks." Ha 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 ha. But Shanks and others ignored Luffy's scolding and continued to laugh. Gotcha. At this time, the door that was originally closed was opened, and little Luffy and the red hair pirates turned their eyes to him. Seeing that Benos's head was wrapped in a circle of bandages, like a seriously injured patient, they naturally knew who the culprit was, and laughed and teased Benos. Ha 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 ha, little Benos, your look today is quite unique. Did you prepare this specially when you saw us coming? Benos looked up at the teasing and ridicule of the red hair pirates, and a trace of embarrassment appeared on his face, and he did not respond. Instead, he looked at Luffy, who was drinking juice leisurely, glared at him, and walked to the bar and sat down next to Shanks. Makino saw Benos with a head full of bandages, but she didn't blame him. Instead, she looked worried and spoke with concern. "Is Benos's head wound okay? How about I take you to the old lady in the clinic and let her take a look?" Feeling the worry and gentle concern revealed in Makino's voice, Benos subconsciously looked up at Makino, and his heart was pounding, and he almost fell. It's not because Makino's appearance is stunning, but because Makino's gentle and kind character is simply the standard for most men in reality to choose a spouse. I couldn't help but curse inwardly. Why did I reincarnate into this little brat, and he is Makino's younger brother? Alas, can't I change my identity before reincarnation? That guy Shanks is really lucky. You should know that in the pirate anime forum, Makino and Four Emperors Shanks have a special relationship, and in the anime clip, Makino is holding a baby. Thinking of this, Benos glanced at Shanks beside him unhappily, and felt like his cabbage was being eaten by a pig. Forget it, losing Makino in exchange for the identity of the brother-in-law of Red Hair Shanks, one of the four emperors of the New World, even if this uncle can't be as terrifying as Luffy, Ace, Sabo and other perverts. I can also rely on the background of the four emperors to deter some rogue marines and pirates. If it doesn't work, this uncle will let Red Hair take me out to sea like a dog's skin plaster. With the four emperors' Red Hair pirates as a backer, I will definitely take a few years less detours than Luffy and others. Thinking of this, Benos has made up his mind. Relying on his eloquence, he first fooled Shanks and let him agree to let him get on the ship. Then he said to Makino, who was worried, in a somewhat stiff voice, "Ah, I'm fine, I just bumped my head. Sister, give me a glass of juice." Hearing Benos's response, Makino looked at Benos carefully, and seeing that he was fine, he nodded slightly and put the prepared juice in front of Benos. "What's the matter, Benos, have you been tricked by Luffy?" Shanks put down the wine glass in his hand, looked at Benos, who was wrapped like an Indian, and smiled. Luffy quickly stood on the chair and refuted Shanks harshly. "Shanks, don't accuse me, when did I trick Benos? Before, I just accidentally bumped into Benos." As soon as these words came out, the red hair pirates burst into laughter again. As the victim of this time, Beos immediately had a black line on his forehead, and he wanted to beat Luffy up. Can I strangle this guy to death? But before Beos could react, Luffy changed the subject, stepped on the bar, and said proudly with a face full of dreams of pursuing the endless sea. By the way, Beos, I have decided that when I come of age, I will go to sea, like Shanks. No, I want to be a pirate who is freer than Shanks and others. What, isn't it impressive? Beos, do you want to join me? Beos, who lowered his head to sip the juice, was stunned. Recalling the scene of Luffy jumping down from the cliff before, he felt a chill on the back of his body. What, invite me to board the ship? No, this is absolutely impossible. Being with Luffy is simply a nightmare. With my small body, 10 lives are not enough to pay for it. Wouldn't it be nice for me to just stay in Red Hair Pirates and play badly? Why should I play with Luffy when I can just lie there until the end of the plot? Beos did not hesitate at all and shook his head to refuse. No, I want to live a few more years. And I already have a goal in my heart. Beos subconsciously looked at Shanks beside him. However, Luffy, who was rejected by Beos on the spot, immediately made everyone laugh again. Shanks naturally noticed Beos's gaze and the desire revealed, smiled slightly, and was about to refuse. But at this moment, there was a loud noise from the door of the tavern. Bang! Half of the door of the tavern was kicked away by a huge force, and it fell directly at the feet of Beos, Shanks, and Luffy. In an instant, the tavern, which was originally full of fun and drinking, was silent. Everyone looked at the door. Tap tap. I said I could hear the sound from so far away. You guys are just stupid pirates. Under the dazzling sunlight, a tall man wearing a dark cloak, with black hair tied up and a long sword hanging from his waist walked in. At the same time, he was followed by several ferocious younger brothers. Is he here? The man who raised his hand and swung the 4 Emperor's bottle. The man who stepped on the future pirate king has appeared. The king of pirates, Sig, once slaughtered 8 million pirates by himself, and then there was a bounty of 8 million. Purely fictional on the internet. Alas, if I were Red Hair, I would just knock him down with my eyes and let Sig fly around in front of me like a fly. You know, Conqueror's Haki of Red Hair Shanks is recognized as the strongest in the sea. Beos sipped the juice in the cup, and there was no surprise in his eyes. He looked at Sig and others who walked into the bar and said secretly. Just as Beos was preparing for the next plot, his eyes went black, and his sea of consciousness was immediately pulled into a strange environment. In the endless ocean around him, stood a dilapidated island with blazing flames. Yashikani no Magatama. Following the line of sight, a figure shining with golden light was high in the sky, and it suddenly launched the terrifying power gathered in its hands, trying to destroy the entire island in one fell swoop. Ding! But with a backhand sweep, the sky full of laser bullets collapsed in an instant, and forced the opponent to stop at lightning speed. She is a very important family member of ours. If you want to take her away from us, you'd better prepare to die. Bang! As this domineering voice fell, the originally colorful world of Madara froze in an instant, and a surging Conqueror's Haki swept all around in an instant, as if it was unstoppable to destroy everything. Boom boom. Even the Vice Admiral can't resist the pressure. Is this the Conqueror's Haki of 4 Emperors Shanks? Looking at the familiar outfit and face wearing a black cloak, a white shirt, cropped pants, and the conspicuous red hair, Beos was shocked. This is... Bang! The next second, the picture in front of him shattered like a mirror, and Beos's sea of consciousness returned to the familiar tavern. Your understanding is heaven-defying. You have comprehended Conqueror's Haki by watching it in person. Looking at the virtual words that appeared in his mind, Beos was shocked. Conqueror's Haki. You should know that Conqueror's Haki only exists in one person among millions of people. At the same time, it is innate and cannot be changed. Even in the later stage of One Piece, Conqueror's Haki is the symbol of the strong standing on the top of the sea. I didn't expect that. I just recalled the unparalleled Haki style of Shanks in the movie version, and I comprehended Conqueror's Haki. Enlightenment is heaven-defying. Is this a cheat to send me to this pirate world? Thinking of this, Beos entered a state of concentration, and the next second, the virtual words appeared again. Through your heaven-defying, Conqueror's Haki will become a king with strong understanding. After further confirmation, Beos understood everything. entering the memory observation and the virtual text that emerged in his mind. Although similar to the novel system flow he had read in his previous life, it was different from it. It was a detailed data interpretation of himself that was generated instinctively under his heaven-defying observation memory. Thinking of his strong understanding of the King's Conqueror's Haki in the pirate world, he couldn't help but get excited. Before this, he had thought of relying on his identity as the brother-in-law of the future four emperors Shanks to be a lazy player who was waiting to die. Now that he has the qualifications to stand on the sea as a king, he must go crazy and witness the final answer of the secret treasure One Piece hidden in the pirate world for many years in his previous life. Welcome. Excuse me, what do you guys need? The tavern owner Makino looked at the broken door under Beos and the others' feet, but he was not angry. He greeted them with a smile. We are bandits. Bring me 10 barrels of the best wine. Sieg put his hand on the bar and spoke with disdain. Makino knew that the other party was not easy to mess with, but now all the wine in the tavern had been drunk by the red-hair pirates, so he could only bite the bullet and respond tactfully. Sorry, the wine just sold out. Hearing the result, Sieg's originally disdainful expression gradually became unhappy. He glanced at the red-hair pirates' crew behind him and said gloomily, "What do these pirates behind you drink? Boiled water." Hearing this, Makino hurriedly explained, "Dear guests, all the drinks in our store have been sold out. Why don't you come back tomorrow?" Sieg's face became more and more gloomy, and at the same time, a fierce light flashed in his eyes. He raised his hand and was about to make a scene. Shanks, who was sitting at the bar next to him, smiled kindly, handed over the unopened bottle of wine in his hand, and said, "Ah, it seems that we have drunk all the wine of the boss lady. If you don't mind, I still have a bottle, which has not been opened yet." Sieg glanced at Shanks expressionlessly, and the next second he raised his right hand, clenched it into a fist, and directly hit the bottle handed by Shanks. Bang! As the bottle broke, the wine and glass fragments scattered around Shanks. "A bottle of wine. Who are you looking down on, pirate boy? I am a wanted criminal with a bounty of 8 million Baileys. A bottle of wine alone is not enough for me to rinse my mouth." Sieg retracted his fist stained with wine, took the towel handed by his younger brother behind him to wipe it, and said in a low voice. Shanks, who was soaked by the wine, was not angry. Instead, he looked regretful and said, "It's a pity for this bottle of wine." Then he looked at the floor stained by wine and broken glass and apologized to Makino. "Sorry, boss lady, I stained your floor. Do you have a rag?" As he said that, Shanks squatted down and wanted to pick up the broken glass one by one. "Ah, Captain, let me clean it up." Seeing this, Makino hurriedly walked out from the counter. But before Makino could get out of the counter, Sieg's right hand had already grasped the handle of the knife at his waist. The next moment, the knife light appeared and slashed at the bar. Bang, bang, bang. Instantly, the wine bottles and glass cups, as well as the juice in front of little Luffy and Beos, were all chopped to pieces by Sieg's blade and scattered all over the floor. "Don't you want to sweep the floor? I'll let you clean it up." As he said that, Sieg raised his knife and chopped Shanks' head, but this speed was like a slow motion in front of Shanks, and he sank his body and easily dodged it. "Tisk, since all the wine has been drunk by these losers, let's go. Go to the next one." Sieg didn't care about Shanks dodging his attack. After all, it was just a sign of power to these pirates. "Goodbye, a bunch of pirate trash." Sieg put the long sword back into the sheath in his hand and turned to leave, and finally didn't forget to curse. Luffy, who had his juice spilled and the bar messed up, was so angry that his teeth were chattering, and his eyes were fixed on the backs of Sieg and others, and he was about to shout angrily. But Beos, who was beside him, shouted first. "Stop." The bandits who were about to walk out of the tavern door stopped immediately after hearing the voice behind them. The proprietress Makino, who was still in a daze, saw Beos calling the bandits to stop, and immediately looked anxious. She hurried to Beos and tried to cover Benos's mouth. Benos. But he was stopped by Beos, who looked relieved at Makino and faced the bandits at the door. Sieg turned around and saw that it was a little brat who called them. He said with a sneer on his face, "Little brat, are you going to die?" If Beos had been afraid of Sieg's threat a dozen minutes ago, although he was in a soul of more than 20 years old, his current body was only 8 years old after all, just a little brat who was only 1 year older than little Luffy. Now that he has awakened Conqueror's Haki, facing these plot extras, or Sig called the entire bandit team, this uncle can knock them all down with a glance. Beos put his hands in his pockets and faced the bandits directly, speaking in a deep voice. After smashing my sister's tavern, you want to walk away without paying the money. Do you think it's possible? Either pay the money and apologize, or go out lying down later. As soon as these words came out, the bandits burst into laughter, pointing at Beos, who was less than 1 meter tall, and sneered. Ha 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 ha, did you hear that, boss? This brat wants us to apologize and pay money, or else he will let us go out lying down. Ha 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 ha, I am dying of laughter, a brat is so bold to talk to us. Is this brat tired of living? Let's chop this brat up, and tear down this shabby tavern by the way. Agreed. Seeing that Beos had completely angered the bandits, Makino was worried and shouted anxiously at Beos. Beos, listen to your sister and come back, and leave quickly through the back door. At the same time, the Red Hair Pirates crew members on both sides of the tavern, as well as Captain Shanks and others, did not speak. But they stared at the bandits with their eyes fixed, and once Sig and his men took action, they would wipe them out without hesitation. Sig did not pay any attention to the entire Red Hair Pirates, who were staring at them with cold eyes, still sneering, and waved to his men beside him, indicating to kill the ignorant brat in front of him. Go, chop that kid off. Yes, boss, I will make sure to make a clear arrangement for this kid. The bandit drew out the long knife from his waist, stared at Beos with evil murderous intent, and walked over with a swagger, not forgetting to sneer. Kid, stand there honestly, it will be over soon. Beos glanced at the extra who was sent to die, and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. The next second, his eyes became sharp, and the whole person's momentum suddenly changed dramatically. It was as if the extremely terrifying monster sleeping in Beos's body was rapidly awakening. Shanks, who witnessed everything behind him, noticed something and showed surprise on his face, shook his head slightly, and murmured in disbelief. This feeling, no, it shouldn't be possible. Beos is only 8 years old, how could he awaken? It must be an illusion. The bandit didn't notice the changes around Beos at all. With a bloodthirsty and ferocious look on his face, he raised the long knife in his hand and slashed at Beos's small body. As the sharp blade gradually approached Beos, Lachi Lu, Usopp and other Red Hair Pirates crew members showed anxiety and looked at Captain Shanks, who was still not moving. Little Luffy behind him saw this scene and quickly jumped off the chair that was taller than him and shouted anxiously. Beos, run! Makino, who was already beside Beos, saw this and didn't care about so much. He rushed to Beos and hugged Beos tightly. Die, kid. Just when the sharp blade was about to hit Makino and Beos, who had lowered his head, suddenly raised it, and a golden light flashed in his eyes. Buzz! An invisible pressure rushed straight to the bandit's forehead. Suddenly, the long knife in his hand that was about to hit Makino and Beos stopped in midair. The whole body was shaking, the originally evil and bloodthirsty pupils rolled their eyes, raised their heads and opened their mouths, and fell to the ground without any consciousness. Bang! Shanks, who was still doubting in his heart, was shocked when he saw this moment, even though he was a veteran, and he couldn't believe it and muttered to himself. Bang! Conqueror's Haki. This scene happened so quickly that even the battle-hardened crew members of the Red Hair Pirates didn't react. Sig and the others at the door looked at their subordinates who fell without any warning and had a face full of question marks. They had no idea what had just happened. But his subordinates couldn't even kill a kid who was less than 9 years old. Suddenly, the doubts in his heart were completely occupied by anger, and he shouted. Waste, you can't even deal with a kid. Come on, chop that kid and the tavern owner's wife to pieces. Sig, who was overwhelmed by his face, quickly ordered the 3 remaining bandits behind him. Yes, boss. After receiving Sig's order, the 3 bandits did not hesitate at all. In their opinion, the reason why the companion fainted just now was just a coincidence of sudden illness, allowing the 2 siblings to escape by chance. But this time, the 3 of them attacked together. Even if these pirates dared to intervene, they could still do a big deal. As the 3 bandits quickly rushed towards Beos and Makino, Sig's originally lost face began to ease up, revealing an arrogant and domineering look. However, just as Sig was waiting for the result of Beos and Makino being killed, Bang bang bang. The sudden fall to the ground broke Sig's original fantasy. How is this possible? How could they lose consciousness and fall to the ground for no reason? The expression on his face changed back and forth, and finally stopped in shock. Shanks, who accepted the reality, looked at the several bandits who lost consciousness and fell to the ground like before, stared at Benos' small back, showed a serious look, and whispered. Is it true, Benos? However, Shanks hadn't finished speaking when Ben Beckman appeared beside him, holding a cigarette and speaking in a deep voice. I never thought that East Blue, which symbolizes peace, would have a king. And from what we can see now, little Benos has not just awakened Conqueror's Haki. Otherwise, only you, me, the cadres, and that kid would be left standing in this tavern. Shanks did not refute, but looked at the king's aura that was faintly emerging from Benos' body at this moment, suppressed his inner shock and admiration for Benos, and smiled. Ah, it's really unbelievable. But, we have also witnessed the birth of a powerful man in the future, right? Ha 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 ha. Faced with such a free and easy captain with an idiotic mindset, Beckman blew out a smoke ring, his face showing helplessness, but he couldn't help but feel serious about Benos, who was only 8 years old. After all, he knew what the awakening of Conqueror's Haki meant, and Benos was able to skillfully control Conqueror's Haki accurately at such a young age. Even he couldn't see through Benos, how terrifying his future achievements would be. Makino, who hugged Benos tightly, heard the sound of falling to the ground one after another behind him. Slowly opening his eyes and carefully observing that Benos was not injured, his worries were relieved and he let go of Benos. When he got up and saw the bandits lying on the floor unconscious and foaming at the mouth, he covered his mouth in surprise. What happened to them? Before Benos responded, the little Luffy behind him rushed to the two of them. Although he didn't know why these bandits lay down before they approached Benos, he was naturally happy that Benos and Makino were fine. Benos, Makino, ha 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 ha, I'm so glad you're fine. Listening to the laughter of little Luffy, Sig, who had recovered from the shock, had veins on his forehead. He gritted his teeth and strode forward, saying gloomily, Little ghost, although I don't know what you just did to my men, this little trick is not enough in front of me, the Bandit King Sig. Benos turned around, stared at Sig who was walking towards him, and spoke with a cold snort without fear. HMPH, you'll know if you try it. Tap tap. Little Benos, using that power twice is a huge drain on your spirit and body. You should rest aside for now. Let me handle it next. After all, this trouble was caused by me. Before he finished speaking, Shanks, who had never spoken, walked to Benos, patted his shoulder and smiled. Seeing this, Sig put his right hand on the handle of the long sword at his waist, glanced at the young pirate who had been humiliated by him before, and spoke with disdain on his face. What, coward, are you sure you want to take care of my business? When Shanks, who was originally smiling, heard Sig's voice, he stretched out his hand to press the straw hat on his head, raised his eyes like a beast and looked directly at Sig, and spoke lightly. Ah, since you choose to attack my friend, then be prepared to die. Feeling the endless terror in Shanks' eyes, Sig's body shook violently, and he subconsciously took 2 steps back. His whole body began to tremble, and he swallowed his saliva in disbelief. What's going on? What was that feeling just now? Why did just a look make me feel fear from the bottom of my heart? Sensing the momentum emanating from Shanks' body, it was like a tsunami, which made Benos envious and said secretly, It is worthy of being known as the strongest existence of Conqueror's Haki on the sea. The Haki on his body is simply bottomless. And in swordsmanship, he can be on par with the world's #1 swordsman. If he can even comprehend Shanks' swordsmanship. Thinking of this, Benos closed his eyes and entered the memory of the famous scene. On the vast ocean, the kid pirates, who had just experienced the Wano Kuni War, received news of the latest historical text and headed towards Elbaf at a high speed. But on the way, they met the 4 emperors' red hair pirates head-on. Hey, are these clowns the red hair pirates? I've seen the faces of many people on the opposite ship on the bounty order. Humph, I don't care who I'm facing, I'll beat them all into the sea in 10 seconds. Try this trick. Buzz. Awakening electromagnetic. The other side who witnessed all this stood in front of the bow, wearing a long black cloak and a white shirt. He was wearing patterned brown cropped pants, flip-flops, and the red hair of the famous sword griffin hung around his waist. His eyes flashed red, and his face suddenly became gloomy. We can't let this guy continue to mess around. Boom. His feet sank, and his figure rushed towards Kid, who was condensing the electromagnetic cannon like a cannonball. Did you predict it in advance? Ben Beckman blew a smoke ring, looked at Shanks, who was rushing towards the opposite pirate ship, and spoke lightly. Shanks drew out the famous sword griffin from his waist with his right hand. In an instant, a terrible pressure suddenly emerged around him, accompanied by black thunders surrounding the blade, and slashed at Kid fiercely. God-defying. Boom. Accompanied by the appearance of white mist, covering all vision, it was like a shocking explosion, and the powerful airflow swept fiercely in all directions, and the endless sea was cut in half in an instant. The next second, the picture was completely shattered, and Beos returned to the familiar tavern. At this time, virtual words also appeared in his mind. You are heaven-defying, and you have strongly comprehended the strongest conqueror's Haki by watching it in person. You are heaven-defying, and you have strongly comprehended the hegemony sword art God-defying by watching it in person. Looking at the interpretation of the hegemony sword art God-defying in the virtual text, Beos couldn't help but get excited. You have to know that this is the top-level slash that the Pirate King Roger, Four Emperors Shanks is proud of, which is a fusion of Conqueror's Haki and swordsmanship. Even in the pirate world, the destructive power of this slash is among the best. Even the immortal Kaido in the form of the mythical beast Blue Dragon dare not take it head-on. At the same time, in the interpretation of the hegemon sword art god avoidance, Beos' understanding of swordsmanship has become more profound. However, according to Beos' current young body, this hegemon sword art god avoidance should be used later. No, this is just an illusion. I am the king of bandits with a bounty of up to 1 million Baileys. How can I be scared by this little pirate in front of me? Sig shook his head, eliminated the fear he just felt from Shanks, gritted his teeth and raised his long sword, ready to kill everyone in the tavern. Shanks no longer hesitated, and raised his foot to solve the ants in front of him at once, but was stopped by Beos beside him. Wait, Shanks is my opponent. Shanks was stunned, looked down at Beos, who called him, and persuaded him. Little Beos, although you can control the power in your body at will, if you use it too much at your age, the consequences will be. I know. Before he finished speaking, Beos interrupted Shanks and smiled confidently at Shanks. Besides, I don't plan to continue using that power. After this, Shanks and the Beckman cadres behind him looked puzzled, and were more shocked in their hearts. Could it be that Beos, this little brat, has other means besides awakening Conqueror's Haki? How is this possible? You know, Beos is only 8 years old now. Even if his talent is terrifying, it is impossible for him to pervert like this. But seeing Beos' confident and serious look, it seems that they can't help but believe it. Thinking of this, Shanks put down his right hand on his waist, looked at Beos deeply, nodded slightly, and spoke seriously. Okay, then I'll leave this guy to you. If I can't beat him, I'll attack him directly. At this time, Beos looked at the famous sword griffin on Shanks' waist, grinned and said, Hey, Shanks, lend me the long sword on your waist. A flash of surprise flashed across Shanks' eyes, and his mouth twitched at the same time. Knife. Could it be that this kid also knows swordsmanship? No way. Could it be that at such a young age, little Beos not only awakened Conqueror's Haki, but also knows swordsmanship? Where did this monster come from? Beckman and the cadres behind him were also surprised. The Conqueror's Haki released by little Beos just now was already unbelievable to them, and now little Beos has borrowed a sword from the captain. Looking at this confident look, Beos may really know swordsmanship. Shanks came back to his senses, put away his surprised look, stretched out his hand to pull out the famous sword griffin on his waist, and handed it to Beos. In his heart, he was secretly looking forward to how many surprises Beos would bring him. Maybe Beos was the one the captain was waiting for. Ah, thank you, Shanks. Beos took the famous sword griffin and looked at the exquisite patterns on the blade, secretly amazed. Is this the famous sword griffin, the weapon of 4 emperors' red hair? The moment I took it, I felt that the Haki in my body began to be attracted by it. It is worthy of being a world-class sword. Sieg, who had been watching Shanks and Beos chatting, saw the famous sword griffin in Benos's hand, and his eyes could not help but show greed, and shouted angrily. The exquisite patterns and sharpness on the blade. Could it be a famous sword? No, I must get this sword. I can't guarantee that I can really sell it for a good price. Have you finished talking? If you're done, you'll die. Sieg shouted angrily, ignoring everyone in the tavern, and raised his hand to chop Benos's head with a knife. For a moment, his nearly 2-meter height blocked all of Benos's retreat routes like a crushing force, leaving Benos with no choice but to take the sudden attack head-on. Benos naturally would not avoid the battle and chose to dodge, raising his hands to collide with the famous knife griffin. Ding! The two sides clashed, and a crisp metal collision sounded. Under the strong force, Benos was forced to retreat 2 steps, and then he stabilized his body and gritted his teeth to persist, cursing secretly. This young body has been strengthened in 2 Heaven-Defyings, but the strength and other aspects are still too weak. Sieg stared at Benos, who seemed to be dying, with a proud and evil look on his face, and quickly swung the long knife in his hand again to chop at Benos. Stop struggling, kid. If you know what's good for you, give me the knife in your hand, and maybe I'll spare your life. Bang! Dang! Benos held Griffin tightly with both hands, constantly resisting the knife light coming towards him, and kept cursing. Idiot! Kid! The angry Sig suddenly became murderous, and the knife in his hand swung towards Benos faster and faster, and the force became heavier, which forced Benos to retreat again and again. It's over, kid. At this time, Sig, who was tired of playing, no longer wanted to continue playing with Benos, a little kid. He held the long knife tightly with both hands and raised it high. Relying on his tall body, he completely covered Benos's young body. With bloodthirsty eyes, he wanted to cut Benos in half. Benos, X2, Makino and little Luffy saw that Benos was forced to retreat, and they shouted anxiously and rushed towards Benos without hesitation. But before the two ran out, Shanks grabbed them in time and said seriously, "Wait, Benos won't be killed so easily." Huh. But, Benos is only 8 years old, how can he beat the Bandit King with a bounty of 8 million Baileys? Luffy and Makino, who were grabbed by Shanks, how could they believe that Benos could defeat the vicious Bandit King in front of them? Don't worry, the next step is Benos' counterattack. Shanks comforted Luffy and Makino. His eyes never left Benos, and he also vaguely felt a ray of sword intent emerging from Benos. Seeing that the long sword in Sig's hand was about to cut Benos in half, Benos's eyes turned cold, his figure sank, and he held the famous sword Griffin tightly in both hands and murmured, "One sword style I instant cut." His figure was like a black shadow, passing by at lightning speed. Swoosh! As the sword light appeared, Sig, who was originally holding the sword to chop, suddenly stopped in place, motionless, as if frozen. Who? Benos behind him put away the famous sword Griffin and stood up, exhaling a foul breath. However, the Red Hair Pirates crew members on both sides of the tavern, after seeing Benos's move just now, were shocked and widened their eyes, opened their mouths and stood there. Even the wine in the wine glass in their hands flowed out, and there was no reaction. The whole tavern turned into silence. What happened? Luffy looked at Sig, who was standing there like a piece of wood without any movement, and subconsciously rubbed his eyes and asked in confusion. The next second, the long sword in Sig's hand broke into 2 sections. Ding! Bang! As the broken knife fell to the floor, blood spurted out of Sig's chest and mouth, and his body completely lost its shape and fell heavily. Defeated! Benos really defeated the Bandit King. Looking at the fallen extra Sig, Luffy looked unbelievable. He had never thought that Benos could really defeat the bandit. He even laughed at Benos' weak physique before. Now Benos showed much more strength than him. I have been training for so long, and my fists are as heavy as bullets, but compared with Benos. At this moment, little Luffy seemed to be hit by 10,000 points. He thought he was already very powerful, but he was wrong. Benos was stronger than him. Benos' mouth curled up slightly, revealing a satisfied smile. At the same time, he was also very satisfied with the famous sword Griffin, but he knew that this Griffin was once given to Shanks by the Pirate King Roger, and Shanks would never give it to him. Then he returned the famous sword Griffin in his hand to Shanks and thanked him. "Thanks, Shanks. Ha 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 ha. Benos, you really impressed us. Not only have you mastered that power at this age, but your talent in swordsmanship is also terrifying. Shanks took the griffin and put it back into the sheath, laughing loudly. At the same time, he couldn't help asking questions about Beos. By the way, Beos, who did you learn swordsmanship from? And when did you awaken that power in your body? Beos knew that at his current age, he had awakened Conqueror's Haki and practiced swordsmanship. Shanks and others would naturally be curious, but how could he tell the secret in his heart? He smiled with embarrassment on his face. Hee, this is my secret. Secret? Shanks frowned slightly, reached out and touched his chin, and took a closer look at Beos. He admired it secretly. I really look forward to the future growth of this kid. Although Beos was reluctant to tell the story, he didn't care. After all, everyone has their own secrets. In his eyes, Beos was the strongest person he had ever seen in terms of qualifications and talent. Crack. At this time, when everyone's eyes were on Beos, a crisp chewing sound came from behind him. Shanks turned around subconsciously and found that Luffy was eating something with big mouthfuls. He thought Luffy was still angry with him because of the previous incident, so he said, "Hey, Luffy, why are you so stingy? I was just joking with you just now. It's not good to vent your anger on food. HMPH. Stop talking nonsense, Shanks." Luffy became more and more unhappy when he heard Shanks mention what happened just now, and took out all his anger on eating. Seeing this scene, Beos smiled slightly and laughed secretly in his heart. Has it started? The exclusive fruit of the pig's feet, the banana? No. It should be the Nika fruit. Tap tap. Seeing that Luffy didn't want to pay any attention to him, Shanks walked towards Luffy, but the more he walked, the more he felt something was wrong. He subconsciously looked at the box on the bar, and felt uneasy. He shouted, "Luffy, what are you eating?" Luffy chewed with big mouthfuls, not paying any attention to him. Seeing this, Shanks didn't care so much, and rushed to the open box. His eyes suddenly widened, and turned his head to ask anxiously, "Luffy, box, what's in the box?" Before Luffy could react, Shanks saw the remaining fruit peel in Luffy's hand, and he was so scared that he covered his head. "Ah, Luffy." The Red Hair Pirates crew members behind him reacted one after another, and were also shocked by Luffy's operation. Shanks rushed to Luffy without stopping, grabbed Luffy's feet, turned his whole body upside down and kept shaking, trying to spit out the fruit Luffy had just eaten. "Quick, Luffy, spit it out." "Ah, Shanks, what are you doing? Let me go." Luffy, who was at a loss, shouted loudly, trying to make Shanks stop. But Shanks had no intention of stopping at all, and instead shook more and more, trying to spit out what Luffy had eaten. The next second, bang, Luffy's head and body were in close contact with the floor, and at the same time, the legs held by Shanks became longer. At this moment, everyone was stunned. Shanks, who was holding Luffy's legs at the same time, also stopped, and a bad mood surged in his heart. Luffy, who was not aware of the abnormality of his body, began to shrink his legs and lifted his little head off the floor. He continued to scold Shanks. "Shanks, let me go." At this time, Shanks came back to his senses, let go of Luffy, covered his head and screamed. "Ah, Luffy actually ate the fruit in the box. That's the rubber fruit, also known as the devil fruit. After eating it, your whole body will become rubber. And you will never be able to swim for the rest of your life." "Ah, are you kidding me?" After listening to Shanks' explanation, Luffy was scared and screamed. "Idiot." Shanks was so angry that he couldn't help cursing. As for Beos behind him, he took another glass of juice and looked at the famous scene in front of him leisurely. Seeger found the box containing the Nika fruit long before he came to the tavern, so he didn't eat it before Luffy. Naturally, he knew that this fruit carried Joy Boy's belief. If he really ate it, let alone whether he would inherit Joy Boy's will, he might not even be able to open the Sun God Nika form. Moreover, now that he has awakened Conqueror's Haki and the swordsmanship interpretation from 4 Emperor's red hair, he does not need the blessing of devil fruit at all. Beos held the juice in his hand and turned his head to see that Sig, who was originally defeated by Beos, was no longer there, leaving only a trail of blood on the floor leading to the outside of the tavern. When all eyes were on Luffy, he took the opportunity to escape. Seeing this, Beos raised his mouth slightly, and did not choose to chase him. After all, Sig still had a crucial link. After a round of episodes, little Luffy gradually accepted the fact that he could no longer swim. But since he ate the rubber fruit, his confidence in his strength has become more and more inflated, and he has repeatedly challenged Beos, but he was beaten black and blue every time. Port, wearing a light blue shirt and white shorts, with a long sword on his back, he walked towards the future Four Emperors Red Hair's Mount Red Force. At the same time, a sticky candy Luffy followed closely behind him, shouting at Beos seriously. "Hey, Beos, accept my 9th challenge. I will definitely defeat you this time." Beos showed helplessness on his face, and just wanted to turn around and teach Luffy love again, but the next second, a tender and beautiful singing voice came from the Red Force in front of him. Beos looked up and saw a girl with long red and white hair and a melon seed face who was a pure beauty, sitting on the bow and singing softly. Shanks' adopted daughter, the singer Yuta. Beos looked at the tender and innocent girl, and it was hard to imagine that in the future, she could almost destroy the entire pirate world by herself. He waved at Yuta and praised her. "Yuta, your singing is getting better and better." Hearing Beos' praise, Yuta's pretty face turned slightly red, and then she confidently responded with her hands on her hips. "Of course, I'm a musician of the Red Hair Pirates." Looking at Yuta's confident and arrogant look, Beos smiled dryly. He still had to establish a firm friendship with her first. "I don't want to be beaten up by Yuta like Luffy in the future. However, where should I start to get closer to Yuta?" Beos, who was lost in thought, recalled his favorite song in the anime in his previous life, which influenced his entire youth, and smiled. "Yuta, I just thought of a good inspiration from the song you sang." "Ah, really? Beos, do you have a unique insight into music?" Yuta, who was originally bored with the arrival of Beos and Luffy, was surprised to hear that Beos was also interested in music, and asked. "Ha ha ha ha, I can't say I have any insights, I just had some inspiration." Beos knew that his plan was successful, so he waved his hands and laughed modestly. Yuta was excited, and quickly jumped from the bow to Beos, stretched out his hand to grab Beos' shoulder, and said impatiently. "Really, Beos, then sing it for me to hear." The young face was full of expectations, and at the same time, the little head thought of something, and put his head close to Beos' ear and said mischievously. "If Beos sings well, I can secretly take you to the treasure house on the ship, where there are many treasures." Hearing that there are treasures, Beos' eyes flashed with a gleam of light. Since he saw the famous sword griffin in Shanks' hand last time, he couldn't wait to have his own sword. Before Beos continued to ask, Luffy heard Yuta's whisper and his eyes lit up, and he excitedly said to Yuta. "Really, Yuta, can you lead us to sneak into Shanks' treasure house?" "Get lost, I just promised Beos, not you, Luffy." Yuta frowned, glanced at Luffy who came up to get in the way, and rejected him coldly. HMPH. As stingy as Shanks. Luffy, who was rejected by Yuta coldly, puffed his face, crossed his arms, snorted coldly, turned his head aside and ignored him. "Don't worry about him, Beos, just sing the music you just inspired to me." Yuta didn't care about Luffy who was sulking, turned around and said with a pair of watery eyes full of expectation. "Ah, okay." Beos didn't expect Yuta to be so obsessed with music, then coughed twice and sang the song that led the whole youth. "I have been gradually attracted by you, and indulged in that dazzling smile. Hold my hand, and escape from the endless darkness together." As the song sounded, Yuta seemed to be fixed in place for a while, feeling the meaning conveyed by the song. It was as if she had fallen into the endless abyss of darkness and could not struggle. In the helpless despair, she was tightly grasped by a big hand leading to light, and took her out of the darkness to welcome the dawn. Luffy, who was sulking behind him, heard the beautiful song coming from Beos' mouth, and was gradually attracted to listen to it. Beos couldn't help but close his eyes, recalling the bits and pieces of his past life, and the tone of his mouth increasingly drove the emotions and meanings in the song. "I'm gradually attracted to you, and even I find it incredible. I want to tell you everything as soon as possible. Even if I pretend not to care, my eyes are still following you alone. Let's run to the other side of the sea together. Hold my hand." As the final climax fell, the harbor resumed the sea breeze and the tide beating the sea surface. "Run to the other side of the sea together." After a long silence, Yuta finally opened her eyes from the fantasy of the song, but her eyes were covered with a layer of tears at this time, and she remained silent for a long time. Woo woo woo. It's so beautiful, Beos. This is the best music I've ever heard. I've decided, Beos, I must pull you onto my boat. The originally quiet atmosphere was broken by Luffy's tears. Humph. Yuta, whose tranquility was broken by Luffy, showed dissatisfaction on her face and snorted coldly. She was shocked that Beos could sing such a beautiful song, and at the same time, she also felt the emotions in the song. After calming down, Yuta took Beos to the Red Force treasury as promised, and Luffy could only be excluded. Gotcha. As the door of the treasury was opened by Yuta, countless golden treasures glittering in front of Beos' eyes. But Beos only glanced at it and walked towards the weapon rack in the depths. Looking at the densely packed weapons around him, Beos looked around and finally stopped in front of the long sword with a sharp blade engraved with exquisite purple patterns. With the blessing of Heaven-Defying and familiarity with swordsmanship, Beos realized that the feeling emitted by the sword in front of him was only a little different from the famous sword griffin in Shanks's hand. He said secretly, could it be that this knife is one of the famous knives? Thinking of this, Beos stretched out his hand without hesitation to hold the handle and picked it up. The next second, the long knife, which was originally normal, suddenly emitted a series of lightning, which instantly filled Beos' body. ZZ. However, before he finished speaking, purple lightning appeared on the blade and raged around the treasure house, as if resisting Beos. Boom. Feeling the pain and numbness that penetrated his whole body, Beos held the handle tightly with both hands, gritted his teeth and insisted, and shouted. It's just a famous knife, and you want me to surrender. Don't underestimate me. Buzz. After the words fell, Beos' young body suddenly emerged with the aura of a king. For a moment, various weapons and some precious treasures on the treasure house were in a mess along with the shelves. After a moment, the treasure house that was originally swept by thunder and momentum began to calm down. Hoo-hoo finally suppressed it. Holding the famous sword that he had tamed tightly in both hands, Beos was breathing heavily and was soaked with sweat, but he smiled and muttered to himself. Hey, Beos, what happened? Yuta, who was keeping watch for Beos outside the treasury, heard the noise coming from inside and quickly asked. Oh, I'm fine, just knocked over some things. Beos put the famous sword back into the sheath in his hand, hung it on his back, looked around the messy treasury in front of him, and a trace of embarrassment appeared on his face. He hurriedly walked out. Hey, what did Beos do in the treasury? It made such a big noise and messed up the treasury. If my father and others knew about it, we would really have to clean the toilet on the ship for a month. Seeing Beos coming out, Yuta frowned, and saw the miserable situation in the treasury and scolded. However, before Beos could explain, Yuta noticed the purple exquisite scabbard and handle on Beos' back, and her eyes were immediately filled with shock. She was not unfamiliar with this big fast sword, the 21st work, Thunder God. At that time, her father's Shanks companions were slaughtered by the king of a certain country, and her father completely destroyed the entire country in anger. This famous sword was a trophy placed in the treasury of that country. However, this big fast sword, Thunder God, had just been unsheathed, shocking everyone. An endless purple thunder emerged, raging violently in all directions. Fortunately, with the suppression of her father, it barely stopped. Now Beos actually brought the sword out. At the same time, judging from the situation and the movement just now, Beos may have subdued this very violent big fast sword, Thunder God. Yuta still showed disbelief on her face and confirmed. Beos, the knife on your back is, the Great Blade 21 Works Thunder God. Ah, is the name of this knife Thunder God? Beos scratched his head and responded in a daze. Although Beos already knew that this knife was among the famous swords, he didn't know the name of this knife. Forget it, anyway, I have already promised before that this Great Blade Thunder God is yours. When my father asks, you can tell me my name. Yuta glanced at the stunned Beos, then looked at the Great Blade Thunder God on his back, with a complicated look on his face. Finally, he sighed deeply, patted his ordinary chest, and said seriously. Well, let's go quickly, if we are caught by Shanks and others later, we can't get away. Beos said nothing, and quickly left Red Force with Yuta. Windmill Village, Back Mountain. One sword style return. Jung, accompanied by a flash of sword light, it hit the black giant, vibrated violently and screamed, and fell heavily to the ground, losing all life. Roar, boom, Boom. This is a black bear, but its size is several times larger than that of an ordinary black bear. Even the elephants in the zoo in the previous life seem small in front of this black bear. Oh, Beos is so powerful. Such a big prey was cut down by your sword. Luffy jumped out from behind Beos, his two legs shining with golden light, ran quickly to the fallen black bear, stretched out his short legs and kicked, turned his head and praised. Hee hee, extra meal tonight. Luffy looked at the food in front of him, and couldn't help drooling at the corner of his mouth. His young arms wanted to drag the black bear away. Suddenly, Luffy felt a sharp pain in his head. Bang. Hey, Yuta, what are you doing? Yes, it was Yuta who came over. Facing Luffy's questioning while holding his head, Yuta ignored him and turned to look at Beos, with an anxious look on his face, and said, Beos, when I came to find you just now, I saw a group of bandits with weapons coming towards the windmill village. Father and the others are not here, what should we do now? Beos put the big knife Lei in his hand back on his back, frowned, and didn't react for a while, muttering to himself. Beos, those bandits are not the ones who smashed the Makino tavern before. Luffy rubbed his head, whose pain was gradually fading, and spoke subconsciously. As soon as these words came out, Beos remembered that Sig had escaped before. No, how could I forget about this? Luffy, we have to go back quickly. Beos didn't care about so much, and hurried to Luffy. Before Luffy could react, Beos grabbed his collar and rushed towards the cliff behind him. Ah, hey, Beos, there is a cliff in front of you, not the way down the mountain. I know, but this way down the mountain is faster. Listening to the screams from the bottom of the cliff, Yuta covered his face with his hands helplessly, sighed, and said to himself. Two naughty guys. Forget it, just in case, I'll contact my father and them. As he said, Yuta took out a Den Mushi from his pocket to contact. According to the original plot, Luffy took the initiative to provoke Sig's gang of bandits today. But Sig was injured by himself before and escaped. Now Sig is bound to come with his bandits to retaliate. The scene changed to the rural road of Windmill Village. The leader, Sig, had his chest wrapped in bandages and his face was sickly pale, but the anger and murderous intent in his eyes became stronger. This time, I will definitely cut that kid into pieces. And that gang of pirates, even the entire village, I will completely destroy them and wash away my previous shame. Boss, didn't you say before that the pirates had a precious sword in their hands? Now that your sword has been broken by that kid, I will grab it for you. The bandit brother next to him looked at the windmill village in front of him, his eyes revealing bloodthirsty greed, and suggested. Thinking of the famous sword, which cut off his beloved sword in his hand with just one blow, Sig looked forward to getting it more and more, and ordered the bandit brother next to him. Well, go, take a few dozen people to catch those two little devils. I don't believe that the pirates can hide any longer. When the time comes, they can only hand over the famous sword obediently. Yes, boss. The bandit brother beside him turned around and gave orders to dozens of bandits, and left with Sig in two separate ways. On the other side, it was learned that Sig's bandits were heading for Windmill Village. Beos didn't delay at all, dropped Luffy in his hand at the entrance of the village, and went to Makino Tavern. After all, Sig's target was him and the red hair pirates. Shanks and the others were not in Windmill Village at the moment, and they couldn't find him. Sig, the extra, would definitely vent his anger on these villagers. The first place to be retaliated was the tavern of Benos' sister. Thinking of this, Benos stepped up his pace and rushed back to Makino's tavern. Bang! Just as Benos kicked the door of the tavern away, he was relieved to see that the tavern was not smashed by Sig's gang of bandits. The sound from the tavern door scared several tables of guests inside. Even Makino behind the bar was shocked, but when he saw the newly installed tavern door kicked away by Benos, he scolded Benos, who hurried back in a bad mood. Benos, can you be gentle when you enter the door? The door that my sister just had someone install will be scrapped again after this kick. Benos looked around at the dissatisfied guests in the tavern and Makino's cold eyes, and quickly scratched his head with an apologetic look on his face. Ah, sorry sister, I just thought. Benos, go and fix the door of the tavern to its original state. If it doesn't work, you won't be able to eat lunch today. Before he finished speaking, he was interrupted by Makino's angry words. Seeing Makino's fury, Benos' head shrank subconsciously. Is this the majesty from his sister? It's even more terrifying than Conqueror's Haki. Sieg and others have already entered the windmill village, and the first target should be Makino's tavern. Why is there no movement yet? It's a pity that the observation Haki has not awakened yet, otherwise it would be able to sense the surroundings. Benos, who was closing the door of the tavern again, kept thinking in his heart. The next second, Benos' mouth twitched and cursed secretly. How could I forget him? He rushed back in a hurry before, and left Luffy at the entrance of the village. Thinking of this, Benos didn't care about the door he was repairing, and turned to rush to the entrance of the village. On the other side, at the entrance of Windmill Village, Sieg, with a bandage wrapped around his chest, led his bandits to escort the captured Luffy and walked leisurely into the village. Bandits, let me go. Let Benos and Shanks know you caught me. They will beat you all. Luffy, who was picked up by Sieg, struggled desperately and roared angrily. Just those useless pirates and that kid. I have nearly 100 brothers behind me. If they dare to show up, I will chop them into meat sauce. Pa! Sieg spat a mouthful of thick phlegm at Luffy's face in his hand, saying disdainfully. Luffy wiped off the thick phlegm on his face while holding back his nausea, still unconvinced and shouting angrily. You are not allowed to insult Shanks and the others. Apologize to them. Otherwise, when Benos comes, I will let him knock you all down. Apologize, and knock you all down. Ha 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 ha. Kid, it seems that you don't understand the current situation. Before Benos, Sieg's chest, which was tightly wrapped by the straps, seemed to begin to hurt slightly. His eyes turned cold and he raised his hand and slapped Luffy. Pa! A crisp sound fell, and a bright red slap appeared on Luffy's face. Suddenly, little Luffy's eyes began to moisten. But he still resisted and stared at Sieg in front of him. Why do you still want to resist me? I'll give you a chance. As long as you tell me where that kid named Benos is and admit that those pirates are trash, I will let you go. Sieg said with a ferocious face and a sneer at the corner of his mouth. Luffy gritted his teeth and roared. I will never betray Benos, and Shanks and the others are not useless pirates, they are looking for death. Before he finished speaking, Sieg, who had already been enraged, reached out to pull out the long sword at his waist and slashed at Luffy's body. Just as he was about to approach Luffy's young body, a voice suddenly came from the front. Stop. Benos, carrying the big sword Lei faced nearly 100 bandits. Is it true? Luffy was caught like in the original book. What a trouble. Hearing the voice, Sieg subconsciously looked up at Benos, who was alone opposite him, with a sarcastic look on his face, and spoke. Little devil, you finally showed up, but why are you alone? Where are those useless pirates who support you? Get the news and run away. After speaking, nearly 100 bandits behind him laughed loudly. Ha 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 ha. Those useless pirates, seeing how many of us are here, must have already run away in fear. Tap tap. Just then, dense footsteps and lazy sounds came from behind. Ah, that's not the case, and you ants are not worthy of our retreat. Chapter 11. Shanks, who received the message from Yuta, did not delay at all and drove Red Force back to Windmill Village at full speed. Seeing that Windmill Village was not destroyed by the bandits, Shanks, the leader, was relieved, but he had already made up his mind to kill Sieg, the bandit. Sieg turned around and put down the long knife in his hand. He stared at the famous knife griffin on Shanks' waist with greed in his eyes, snorted coldly, and said arrogantly. Ha, are you here, pirate? Now this kid is in my hands. If you don't want him to die, hand over the knife on your waist. I am so merciful that I spared this kid's life. Shanks ignored Sieg, who was like a dead man, and joked leisurely to Luffy. Hey, Luffy, didn't you say that fists are faster than bullets? How did you get caught by these guys? Stop talking nonsense, Shanks. Seeing Shanks's face that deserved a beating, Luffy was furious and retorted. When Benos saw the red hair pirates rushing back, he didn't show any surprise on his face. After all, it was the main plot line. Even if Yuta didn't contact him, Shanks would come in time. Have you talked enough, pirate boy? Hand over the knife on your waist. Otherwise, I will kill this kid. Hearing that the two were still playing, Sieg had lost his patience and kicked Luffy to the ground. Then he raised his long knife in his right hand and put it against Luffy's neck, threatening him. Shanks had no expression on his face and raised his foot to walk towards Sig. Pirate boy, if you dare to take another step forward, I will smash your head. The bandit next to Sig walked quickly towards Shanks and raised his pistol to Shanks' head, saying arrogantly. Shanks ignored the pistol against his head, raised his eyes with a pair of cold eyes, faced Sig and nearly 100 bandits behind him, and said in a deep voice. Since you choose to draw your gun, then be ready to risk your life. When these words came out, Sig and his people were subconsciously stunned, and then they all laughed. Ha 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 ha, did you hear it just now? This coward actually dared to tell us to risk his life. This guy probably can't see the situation clearly. There are nearly 100 people on our side, and they are just. Bang! Before the bandits continued to laugh, a gunshot suddenly broke the original stalemate. Bang bang! Under the shocked eyes of everyone, the bandit who had just put a pistol against Shanks' head was shot in the head by Lachi Lu, who weighed hundreds of pounds, wore watermelon skin clothes, and gnawed chicken legs in his hands. The bandits who reacted all showed fierce looks on their faces and gritted their teeth and spoke. Attack! Attack! These guys actually attacked us by surprise. We can't let them go. Kill them all. Beckman behind him took a step forward, exhaled a smoke ring, and sneered. Despicable, don't be naive. Since you choose to start a war, you should be prepared to fight. After all, we are pirates. Sig glanced at his brother lying in a pool of blood, frowned, and the long knife in his hand approached Luffy's neck more and more, saying gloomily. Pirates, aren't you really afraid that I will kill this kid? Shanks raised his head with a pair of cold eyes, staring at the bandits on the opposite side, and spoke in a deep voice. Listen, bandits, whether you pour wine or food on my head or spit on me, I will laugh it off. But no matter what your reasons are, I will not allow anyone to hurt my friends. Luffy, whose face was stepped on by Sig, was touched and whispered in a low voice. Shanks, facing the sudden strength of the pirates, Sig was not afraid at all. He looked at Shanks and others, his eyes bloodshot, and shouted loudly at the hundreds of bandits behind him. Just a bunch of useless pirates. Little ones, go together. Kill them all. Oh, kill. Hearing Sig's order, the densely packed bandits behind him took out their weapons and charged at the red hair pirates. Tap tap. The red hair pirates, led by the ship's deputy Beckman, stood up with long guns in their hands and said calmly. Leave it to me. Wait, Uncle Beckman, let me deal with them. At this time, the young figure of Beos appeared beside Beckman, raised his head and said seriously to Beckman. Beckman subconsciously looked down at Beos. Although Beos had awakened Conqueror's Haki, he was only 8 years old now. He was still a little worried about facing hundreds of bandits alone. He was going to refuse, but after noticing the knife on Benos's back, a flash of surprise flashed in his eyes. The knife on Benos's back is the big knife Thunder God. He didn't expect that an 8-year-old kid could tame this very violent big knife Thunder God and make it a sharp blade in his hands. He couldn't understand how terrifying Benos's talent and understanding were. Thinking of this, Beckman nodded in agreement. Okay. Let me see how you have grown during this period of time. I promise to satisfy you, Uncle Beckman. Benos turned his head and faced the densely packed bandits, his eyes full of coldness, and with a step forward, a terrible aura suddenly emerged from his young body, raising the dust around him. Seeing this, Beckman and all the Red Hair Pirates crew officers turned their eyes to Benos, and their faces began to become serious. You are becoming more and more proficient in controlling Haki. What a scary little devil. Even Shanks' mouth began to slightly rise, and he murmured in a low voice. Ha 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 ha, these guys are really cowards, they actually sent a little devil out to die. This little devil's head is mine. Go to hell. As the swarm of bandits gradually approached, they were about to chop Benos, and the next second, Benos's eyes kicked, and a golden light flashed. Buzz. Boom. In an instant, a terrifying momentum broke out, sweeping around in an instant, forcing Benos's sword to stop in midair, and the bandits who rushed up all foamed at the mouth and rolled their eyes, and fell to the ground unconscious. Bang bang bang. Whew. A breeze blew. A few seconds later, the Red Hair Pirates crew came back to their senses and looked at the fallen bandits in front of them. Looking at the Haki that was constantly emanating from Benos's young body, he couldn't help swallowing his saliva and spoke. Hey, is this true? Beos solved hundreds of bandits in just a moment. Ah, there's no need to be so surprised, right? After all, our captain can solve them at will, right? Tisk, do you need to tell me that? Of course I know that the captain can solve them at will, but the problem is that the one who solved these hundreds of bandits is Beos, who is only 8 years old. With this talent alone, who on the sea can do it? Ah, little Beos is simply a monster. I'm really looking forward to the future of this kid. Quote. Beckman looked at Beos with more expectations and worries in his eyes. He felt that Beos must have a place on the sea in the future. At the same time, they were worried about whether Beos would become their enemy in the future. After all, his inner goal was unclear at the moment. If such a monster became a marine, it would be a nightmare for pirates. However, Beckman's worry was unnecessary. Beos would not become a dog of celestial dragons and world government. Beckman turned his head and looked at Sieg, who was already shocked by Conqueror's Haki, and said coldly, "Sorry, if you want to be our enemy, you must at least drive a warship over. Such ants are not worthy of our red hair pirates to take action personally." Luffy, who was stepped on by Sieg, looked at the bandits lying down and was stunned. So strong. Beos is getting stronger and stronger. At this time, Luffy had made up his mind, and he was bound to pull Beos onto his ship. As Beckman's shouting reached Sieg's ears, he was panicked at the moment. He didn't expect that hundreds of people under his command would be knocked down by an 8-year-old kid, and the key point was that the pirates didn't even have a chance to attack. The arrogant and disdainful attitude on his face disappeared instantly in front of this scene, and he waved his hands and begged for mercy. Wait a minute, I didn't mean to provoke you, let me go. That little. No, big brother, you are generous, please forgive me. Shanks looked at Beos beside him, with a touch of relief and expectation on his face, and gave Beos a thumbs up and praised him. Well done, Beos, you are becoming more and more proficient in controlling that power. Hearing the praise from the future 4 emperors, Beos was a little embarrassed and scratched his head in response. Ah, compared to you, Shanks, I am still far behind. Shanks smiled, then raised his eyes and said disdainfully to Sig. Hey, I heard your head is worth a lot, stay here. Hearing that Shanks was not going to let him go, Sig, who had been lowering his head, broke into a cold sweat, gritted his teeth, and suddenly looked up and stared at Beos, Shanks, and shouted angrily. Knowing that he was no match for him, Sig quickly took out a smoke bomb from his pocket and threw it at the ground. Bang! As the smoke filled the surroundings, completely obscuring his vision, Sig grabbed Luffy under his feet with one hand and quickly fled. It's over, I was so careless that I let that guy kidnap Luffy, what should I do? The smoke dissipated, Shanks quickly rushed to Sig's original position, and immediately covered his head with both hands in anxiety, shouting. Beckman covered his face with his hands, and sighed helplessly at his idiot captain. I can't stand this guy. Boss, don't worry, let's start looking for him separately, he won't be able to escape our pursuit. At this time, Shanks couldn't listen anymore, he covered his head with his hands and looked around. Hey, Shanks, is Luffy going to be saved? Beos was speechless. No matter what, Shanks is also a famous pirate. Since Sig escaped, can't he activate observation Haki to sense his location? Forget it, in order to save time, I'd better remind him. Of course I will save him. Beos, do you know where that guy took Luffy? Shanks looked down at Beos and asked stupidly. Why don't we activate observation Haki to sense the direction of that guy's escape? Yes, why did I forget this? Thanks for reminding Beos. Shanks' fists collided with his palms, and he quickly closed his eyes and activated observation Haki to sense the direction of Sig's escape. The scene changed to the sea. Sig stood on a small boat, holding Luffy in one hand, laughing wildly towards the windmill village on the shore. Ha, a bunch of idiot pirates, they would never have thought that I would leave by water, right? Luffy kept struggling in the air, even hitting Sig's right hand, but he couldn't break free and could only curse angrily. Bandit, let me go. Sig, who was disturbed, stared at Luffy with disdain and said sarcastically. Little devil, you dare to scold me when you are about to die. Go to hell. After saying that, Sig grabbed Luffy and threw him into the sea. Gurgle, gurgle. Luffy struggled desperately to swim, but he had already been spurned by the sea after eating the devil fruit. Under the continuous infusion of seawater, Luffy's young body gradually lost strength. Ha 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 ha, although I didn't kill the other kid, getting rid of this kid will also make me feel better. Staring at Luffy, who was still struggling before his death, Sig laughed wildly. But the next second, the ugly smile on his face froze. The originally calm sea surface suddenly raised huge waves, and a huge monster suddenly jumped out of the sea. It showed a huge head, a pair of bloodthirsty eyes, opened its bloody mouth, and roared at Sig. Sig was so scared that he stood there, his eyes widened, his teeth were trembling, and he couldn't even pull out the long sword at his waist, and said in horror, You don't come over. Ah! Accompanied by the sound of despair, the king of the sea suddenly pounced on Sig, and in an instant he and the boat were completely swallowed up. Bang! Suddenly, a huge wave rose on the sea surface. In the distance, Shanks and Beos were rowing a boat, chasing in the direction that observation Haki had sensed. Not good. Luffy is in danger. After seeing the huge monster on the sea, Shanks didn't care about so much, and rushed out like a cannonball. At the same time, Beos stretched out his hand and slowly pulled out the big sword lay on his back, and the sword intent burst out from his body, and his eyes were fixed on the sea surface. One sword flow. Underwater. The king of the sea that swallowed Sig turned his head and stared at Luffy, who was struggling in the water, and suddenly opened his fangs and rushed forward. Luffy's eyes widened when he saw this. In the fear of death, he wanted to open his mouth to call for help, but under the infusion of sea water, he couldn't send out a call for help at all. Help, Gulu, help. Jung. The moment the king of the sea appeared on the sea, Beos didn't hesitate, holding the big sword lay tightly with both hands and slashed fiercely, but it was too late after all. Seeing that the bloody mouth was about to swallow Luffy, a figure suddenly appeared in front of Luffy and hugged him. Tear. At the same time, a sharp slash passed through the king of the sea. Without a scream, the Akoku of the sea was split in half, and blood was splashed on the sea. Swish. Boom. On the sea. Feeling that he was holding Luffy, he subconsciously opened his eyes and was about to be happy when he saw the familiar face. The next second, he was stunned, staring at Shanks's bloody and empty left arm, and said in disbelief. Shanks, your arm. Okay Luffy, it's just an arm. After saying this, Luffy couldn't hold it back anymore and burst into tears. Beos, who came in a boat, noticed that Shanks's bloody left arm was empty, and a complicated look appeared on his face, and he sighed inwardly. Still a step too slow. For Luffy, he bet his arm. Perhaps this future 4 Emperor had already made a decision when he met Luffy. Shanks naturally saw Benos's complicated expression, smiled, thanked, and comforted him. Thanks to Benos just now, otherwise it would not be just one arm. Benos rolled his eyes at Shanks, thinking that he was kidding. If Shanks really wanted to make a move, the king of the sea could tear off the arm of Shanks, one of the future 4 emperors of the New World, red hair, and he would lose. Of course, Benos also saw through it but didn't say it. He took Shanks and Luffy back to Windmill Village. On the shore, the villagers and the red hair pirates were waiting anxiously. Seeing the few people on the boat on the sea, the villagers breathed a sigh of relief. As Benos, Shanks, and Luffy came ashore, everyone also noticed Shanks' empty arm covered with blood, and their faces showed complicated expressions, and at the same time a little guilty. The red hair pirates were shocked, puzzled, and finally silent. Noticing the dull atmosphere in front of him and his sister Makino anxiously helping Shanks to deal with his injuries, Benos did not disturb him and walked straight to the village. After this incident, Benos realized his own shortcomings, especially his reaction nerves. If he could know the movements of the king of the sea in advance, his sword would not be passive. Although Shanks was destined to break his arm, he was aware of his own shortcomings. Benos secretly made up his mind to practice hard. After all, the enemies he faced in the endless sea in the future would not give him a teaching plan. A few days. On the shore of the port, Benos looked at Shanks taking off his straw hat under the sunset and putting it on Luffy's head with tears in his eyes. As the inheritance of the will of D here to kick off. Benos couldn't help but whispered in a familiar classic plot. Hey, does Benos's song have a name? At this time, Yuta, with a reluctant and complicated expression, slowly walked to Benos and said. That song. It's called Gradually Attracted by You. Hearing Yuta's question, Beos looked up at the endless vast sea dyed yellow by the sunset and sighed. Gradually attracted by you. I know. Yuta nodded heavily, walked towards the boat, and finally stretched out her hand and shouted goodbye to Beos. Beos, one day I will let this song spread all over the world. With the ideal of running to the other side of the sea, sail freely. Shanks, who witnessed Yuta's promise to Beos at the bow, smiled. After getting along with Beos for this period of time, he was very rare on the sea for his talent, understanding, and calm personality at the age of only 8. If Beos was not young now, he really wanted to recruit Beos on board, but he knew that this was impossible. Beos' future could not be buried on his boat. Beos, I look forward to seeing you at the top in the future. I will, Shanks. Beos looked straight at Shanks and spoke confidently. After that, Shanks waved goodbye to the villagers of Windmill Village, and gradually faded away with red force. Luffy's eyes did not leave, wiping tears with his left hand, pressing the straw hat on his head with his right hand, recalling the agreement with Shanks, and made up his mind. At this time, the old village chief with a cane walked to Luffy and said seriously. Luffy, I got a call this morning. Your grandfather Garp will be back in the afternoon. Hearing that his grandfather was coming back, Luffy stopped crying immediately, his eyes full of fear, and said. Ah, why is the old man back? No, if the old village chief comes back to ask, just say I'm not here. Before the village chief spoke, Luffy's legs were like greased, and he disappeared from everyone's sight. Seeing this, Beos' mouth twitched. Although he knew that Luffy was very afraid of meeting his grandfather, it was not so exaggerated. However, Beos still looked forward to meeting this legendary marine. The scene turned back to the tavern. Beos, you don't know how terrible that old man is. Even I was almost killed by him. Just as Luffy was sitting at the bar drinking juice and constantly explaining to Beos beside him what kind of ferocious beast his old man was. Luffy, with a bang, the door of the tavern was kicked open. Before everyone could react, a strong voice reached everyone's ears. Hearing this devilish voice, Luffy was frightened and his teeth chattered. He stared at the door with fear in his eyes and strode in. Beos also looked up subconsciously, and saw a sturdy man in a black suit, with a short black hair and a short beard, walking towards Luffy with a gloomy face. Grandpa, Vice Admiral Garp. The appearance of Garp attracted the attention of everyone in the tavern for a while. The villagers showed awe on their faces. After all, Garp was the pride of their Windmill Village. At the same time, with Garp's protection, many lawless elements and pirates dared not come here to cause trouble. Garp nodded slightly and continued to walk towards Luffy. As soon as he entered the Windmill Village, he learned that Luffy not only had contact with red-haired Shanks, but also ate devil fruit. This made Garp, as a grandfather, angry. He picked up Luffy like a chicken and roared. Luffy, you will be a marine with your grandfather in the future. How can you be involved with those pirates, and eat the devil fruit? Luffy, whose face was sprayed with saliva, heard Garp scolding Shanks and others, and his body kept struggling to break free from Garp's big hand, and he retorted loudly. I don't want to be a marine, and Shanks and others don't want to be fools. Let me go, old man. Seeing that Luffy was still stubborn and surrounded the red-haired guys to scold him, Garp was immediately furious and raised his casserole-like fist to hit Luffy's head. Luffy, you dare to call Grandpa a dead old man. Take my iron fist of love. Bang. Ah, didn't I become a rubber man? Why does the fist of the dead old man still hurt so much? Because Grandpa has attached a layer of love to his fist. The villagers around the tavern watched the two grandfathers and grandsons quarreling, but their appetite increased, and they ate and watched the show. As for Beos next to him, seeing Garp's fists as big as sandbags, the corners of his mouth couldn't help but twitch, and he silently prayed for Luffy in his heart. Are you so shameless that you even use Armament Haki to beat your grandson? Oh, I hope you can still recognize Luffy later. Armament Haki. At this time, Beos noticed something. His face became serious, his eyes narrowed, staring at Garp's fist with invisible Armament Haki. Is this the man from the pirate world who has practiced Armament Haki to ultimate? Although I have seen it in the original work in my previous life, I can't help but sigh that Garp's understanding of Armament Haki is extremely terrifying when I see this scene with my own eyes. What a powerful force. While sighing, Benos's eyes suddenly went black. In a moment, he was already in front of an unknown island. Hey, green pepper, I will definitely smash your head completely today. Crack, crack, crack. I used 8 mountains as sandbags and smashed them into pieces before coming to you. A tall man with a scar on his left eye. He has a gray and black crew cut and wears a marine justice cloak. Marine hero Garp. Benos was shocked. What is this scene in front of him? Yahahaha, no matter what you do, it's useless. There's nothing harder than my head in this world. Wearing a flowery green cape, with a cone dragon on his head that penetrates everything, he is the strongest leader of the 8 Treasures Navy. He was once listed as a legend with his contemporaries Roger, Whitebeard, and Golden Lion Shaki, and is known as the Cone of Green Pepper. Swoosh, wake up, Green Pepper. At this moment, a flash of red light flashed in Garp's pupils, and he raised his fist, which was gradually covered with black armament Haki, and before it was over, a pink flame surrounded his fist. He sank suddenly, and rushed towards Green Pepper like a cannonball. Look at me smashing your proud iron fist. Garp. Green Pepper, known as the strongest cone dragon, did not show any weakness. The cone dragon on his head was covered with the extremely hard armament Haki, and he rushed forward. Boom! The 2 strongest armament Haki collided strongly, and the violent power instantly swept the entire island from the center of the collision. The island began to shake. Feeling the shaking ground and the collision of the 2 strongest armed colors, Benos' heart was shaken. Ha! Crack! Crack! With a roar, the extremely hard cone dragon was gradually disintegrated by the fist surrounded by pink flames. Swoosh! Boom boom! The violent impact instantly blasted Qingjiao down, and the island ground under his feet was completely shattered like tofu in an instant, and the sea was full of waves. Ha! The next second, the picture in front of him was completely shattered, and Benos' consciousness returned to his mind. You understand Heaven-Defying, and you have a strong understanding of the strongest armament Haki by watching it in person. You understand Heaven-Defying, and you have a strong understanding of Garp's fist by watching it in person, fist bone meteorite. Virtual words also appeared in his mind. Hey, Benos, Benos. After the education of Luffy fiercely, Garp glanced at it, and Benos, who was dumb, shouted 2 times and still raised his fist at Benos' head. Benos, who was originally conscious, suddenly felt a pain, and quickly returned to the tavern, covering the big bag of swollen head over the head, and his face was innocent. The ghost is in a daze, and you can't help yourself. Quote. By the way, Benos, have you affected by the red-haired guy, want to be a pirate? But this can only be thought of in the heart. After all, the old man in front of him can smash the whole town with 1 punch, so he can't be provoked. No, I don't have any idea, I just want to help my sister take care of the tavern. Benos shook his head and denied it. This is simply a death sentence. I am not as stupid as Luffy, saying that I want to be a pirate in front of Marine's hero grandfather. This will definitely be beaten to death by Garp. Seeing that Benos was not affected by him, Garp was relieved, but for the sake of their young hearts, they were determined not to be affected by the red-haired guy during their growth. He said seriously, you 2 can't stay in Windmill Village for the time being, go to another place with me. Benos was stunned. What? I am also being taken away. I didn't say I want to be a pirate, why do I have to follow Luffy? Ah, Grandpa Garp, I think I don't need it, I still have to help in the tavern. Before he finished speaking, Luffy, who was beaten into a pig head by Garp, heard that he was going to be taken away, and quickly got up from the floor and loudly retorted. No, I want to stay here with Benos and not go anywhere. Hearing Luffy's words, Benos gritted his teeth and wanted to rush up and beat this idiot. I was shot even when I was lying down. Luffy, I will beat you into a pig head when the time comes. Garp looked at Luffy, who still did not repent, and was instantly furious. He grabbed Luffy, who was struggling on the floor, with his left hand, and strode towards the door of the tavern with Benos, who was doubting his life, in his right hand. Finally, he did not forget to say to Makino in front of the wine cabinet. Makino, I took Benos away. I will definitely educate him to be a righteous marine. Really, then I will leave Benos to Grandpa Garp. As a sister, Makino not only did not stop Garp from taking Benos away, but was happy instead. She bowed deeply to Garp's back and thanked him. Mount Gorpo. Along the way, Garp held Beos in one hand and pulled Luffy's elongated face with the other hand, constantly instilling the concept of representing a righteous marine in his mouth. But Luffy did not buy it. Even though he had just experienced a loving education, his little hand kept slapping Garp's thigh. This was the last stubborn resistance he could do. He said hard, "Grandpa, let me go. I want to be the Pirate King." Hearing Luffy's determination to become a pirate, the old man was so angry that the veins on his forehead suddenly popped up and he roared loudly. "What Pirate King? I just said so much, but you didn't listen to it at all, Luffy. You've eaten the devil fruit and are still talking nonsense. Luffy, you and Beos, Ace will all become the strongest marines in the future." "You idiot." Beos, who was dragged into the water by Luffy, listened to the constant quarrel between the grandfather and grandson along the way, and said to Luffy with a helpless look, "Hey, Luffy, can't you be quiet for a while?" "Ah, Beos, you were also caught by Grandpa." Soon, the three of them came to a wooden house, and Garp stretched out his iron fist and kept knocking on the door. Bang, bang, bang. Suddenly, the door was pushed open, and a rough woman with a cigarette in her mouth and a bandit-like appearance, with a furious look on her face, yelled at the figure in front of the door. "It's so noisy, who is the one who is not willing to die?" "It's me." As the voice sounded, Dadan, who was about to go berserk, opened his eyes and his expression froze. The next second, his figure suddenly stepped back and almost collapsed on the ground. At the same time, the two companions in the room saw that it was Garp, and they all said with horror, "Ka, Garp." Beos saw the fat, fleshy, orange-yellow-haired middle-aged woman in front of him, holding a cigarette in her mouth. Dada, the woman who raised Ace for 17 years and Luffy for 10 years in the original work, is definitely the adoptive mother of Ace and Luffy. Zhang Shi Zai Yuan J Summit Warhu, Dadan De Ji Ace Si Shuan, Ji Bian Mao J Bei Garp Mie Sha De Feng Xian, Yi Ji Bu Zu Dadan Dui Yu Ace, Luffy De Mu I, Chao Chi Da Mu Bang Quang Zo Garp Ideographic period. Yi Ge Zai Ku Quang Air Man Bu Nai Fan Y Biao De Yan Shi Sha, Lu J Yi K Si I De Shin Ideographic period. Garp Shuang Shou Cha Do, Lu Chu Yi Mo Xiao Rong, Da Chi Jiao Hu Dao Ideographic period. Yo, Hao Ju Bu Jian, Kan Chi Lai Ting Jing Xian De Ma Ideographic period. Da Dan Ideographic period. Kan Dao Lu Chu De Xiao Rong Zai Da Dan Kan Lai, Fang Fu Ke Shi Rui Mo Yi Ban Ideographic period. Lian Meng Jing Kong Tan Kai Shou Wei Ying Ideographic period. Ka, Garp Xian Shang, Zi Kong Jiao Gu Ace Na Xiao Zi Kai Shi, Wo Men Do Yi Jing Kong Liang La, Mei Fan Guo Yi Dian Y Shi Ideographic period. Hai Yu, Ace Na Jia Huo Do Yi Jing Shi Sui La, Shuo J, Da Dan Yi Ji Liang Ming Shan Zai Tong Ban Chong J Garp Gui La Sha Lai, Yi Ba Bai Ti Yi Ba Lei Chu Rao Ideographic period. I'm not here to arrest you today. Really, he's already this old, how is Ace doing? Hearing that Ace is already 10 years old, Garp asked and laughed. The three of them were relieved to see that Garp was not really here to arrest them. But thinking back to that guy Ace, the short bandit rolled his eyes at Garp and said helplessly, "This is not the time to laugh. We are almost helpless against him. Take him back quickly. Compared to these." "What do you mean compared to these? Listen to what he says. Who is this kid? So annoying." Garp ignored the helplessness of the three people, and then grabbed Beos who was standing beside him honestly, and Luffy who was running around in front of him, and said, "I'll leave these two guys to you two. Come on, Luffy, say hello to Beos." Luffy raised his hand with a silly face, and Beos smiled and said hello. "Yo, hello." The three Dadans thought they had misheard, but noticed the two little brats in Garp's hands and looked at them. Another tall bandit companion asked subconsciously, "Who are these two kids?" Garp responded in a deep voice, "The kid on the left is Makino's younger brother, and the one on the right is my grandson." The three Dadans, who were already troubled by Ace, heard that two more little brats were brought, and they were immediately hit hard in their hearts. Shouted, "Two more." The three Dadans knelt down in front of Garp, tears in their eyes, and firmly objected. "Really spare us, Ace alone has left us helpless, and two more." Before he finished speaking, he was interrupted by Garp in a threatening tone. "Okay, then you choose, do you want to end your life in prison, or do you want to raise these two boys?" By the way, you have committed countless sins, but I have always pretended to be blind to them. Ha 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 ha. No matter how strongly Dadan and the other two opposed, they could not resist under Garp's strong threat. On the other side, Luffy, who was extremely curious about the new environment, ran around. At this moment, Beos noticed the slight movement from the tree in the distance, and said secretly, is it coming? The next moment, he noticed that two things were attacking him and Luffy. Are you going to show your power? Benos's mouth curled up slightly, and his body subconsciously dodged, successfully removing the saliva flying towards him. Ah, what is it? Saliva, so dirty. But Luffy next to him didn't have such good luck, and was directly smeared with flying saliva. Who is it? Then he looked back and forth in the woods and saw a boy wearing a red shirt and a quirky face standing on a branch, staring at Luffy and Beos with his arms crossed. Did he dodge it? It seems that this guy is very strong. Although he didn't say anything, he was still a little surprised that Beos dodged it easily. Luffy, who was humiliated, quickly questioned the tree. Hey, I said you, apologize to me quickly, this is too disgusting. Hearing Luffy's shout, Garp turned around and looked at Ace, who had grown to 10 years old, with a loving look on his face. As he walked towards Luffy, Beos explained. Said, Luffy, Beos, this guy is Ace. He is already 10 years old this year, so he is your brother. In the future, Luffy, Beos, you two will live with them. How can you make your own decisions? The three people behind him quickly objected, but in Garp's eyes, the objection was invalid. After hearing Garp's words, Beos did not show any surprise on his face, and his face was still calm. But Luffy beside him stared at Ace with his eyes, gnashing his teeth, and wanted to rush up to fight with Ace. Bang! Hey, Luffy, get along well. But under Garp's iron fist of love, Luffy could only cover his head and feel the pain. At this time, the three people of Dadan could no longer bear it. After all, one Ace had already made them anxious. If there were two more, wouldn't it be that their family would be torn apart? How can you make a decision on your own? We haven't, yet. Are there any problems? Before he finished speaking, a sharp look, accompanied by a terrifying and coercive voice, frightened Dadan and the other two and changed their minds immediately. No, I guarantee you will be treated like an emperor. Garp nodded slightly, explained to Dadan and the other two and Luffy, and left with Beos. Okay, I have something else to do. If I have time, I will come back to see you. Beos, you go to a place with me first, and then come back here to live with them. What, Grandpa, you want to take Beos away? No. He is the first mate of my future Pirate King ship. Still talking nonsense, Luffy. Luffy strongly opposed Garp, but the next second, a fistful of love burst towards Luffy's forehead. Bang bang bang. After being baptized by love, Luffy, who had a big bag on his head, completely quieted down and dared not speak again. Beos looked up at Garp, who was serious, and a sense of vigilance rose in his heart. It seemed that Garp had already known about his previous solution to Sig's gang of bandits. Could it be that he was planning to pull him into the marine camp? Forget it. He was no match for Garp at the moment, and it would be useless even if he resisted. He nodded slightly, followed Garp's footsteps and left. Dadan and the other two looked at Garp, and Beos disappeared into the woods. The short bandit beside him asked cautiously, Boss, do we really have to treat this kid like an emperor? Dadan, who reacted, coughed twice, looked around, and confirmed that Garp had left. He quickly put on a fierce look and said arrogantly, Bah, when did I say I would raise this brat and treat him like an emperor? What the hell is he dreaming about? I don't care whether this brat lives or dies. With that, Dadan crossed his arms and turned to walk into the house. The two bandits were confused by this scene. They looked at each other and were about to say something when they heard Dadan's rough voice. Hey, what are you two still doing? Why don't you prepare the ingredients for lunch? Do you want to starve me to death? As soon as these words came out, the two bandits laughed, glanced at Ace and Luffy who were still confronting each other, and quickly followed Dadan's footsteps. On the way back to Windmill Village, Garp looked at the knife behind Beos from the side and suddenly asked. Beos, I heard that you defeated the bandits who came to Windmill Village to cause trouble. The knife on your back should be given to you by the red-haired guy, right? Hearing this, Beos was subconsciously stunned. It seems that these things can't be concealed. Beos simply sorted out the matter in his mind, added some changes to the matter, and explained. Yes, Grandpa Garp, when Shanks and his friends were in Windmill Village, I asked him for the method of practicing swordsmanship so that I could defeat those unforgivable bandits. As for the thunder guard on your back, it was given to me by Shanks and his friends before they left. Garp's eyes flashed with shock. He didn't expect that the red-haired guy actually valued Beos so much. Thunder Guard. If he guessed correctly, the knife should be the Great Blade 21 Works Thunder Guard, a famous sword that can release violent thunder. Thinking of this, Garp became more and more curious about Beos's talent, secretly. Have you been able to tame the power of that knife? Although Garp has always been a thick-skinned person, the talent shown by Beos has greatly exceeded his expectations. Thinking of this, Garp is more and more looking forward to Beos's future achievements in Marine. He grabbed Beos and laughed. Ha 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 ha, not bad. Beos, this time Grandpa rarely gets a long vacation from Sengoku. Grandpa wants to train you, so that you can become a great Marine like Grandpa in the future. Beos' mouth twitched, and a look of disgust flashed in his eyes. This old man is really bold, fooling Luffy and Ace is not enough, even dragging me in. But I don't want to be a Marine, the dog in front of the world government and celestial dragons. Even if Red Dog is kicked down from the position of Admiral and let me do it, I don't want to be with him. Wouldn't it be nice to be a pirate and sail freely on the endless sea? And the truth of the final point of this world, he must do it. But these can only be thought in the heart, and must not be said like Luffy, the fool. Ah, Grandpa Garp, I don't have the idea of becoming a Marine for the time being. Garp waved his hand, not caring about Beos' answer at all. In his opinion, Beos is only 8 years old now, and he doesn't know much about Marine affairs, but he can force Beos to brainwash him little by little. Ha 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 ha, it's okay, I will slowly tell you the benefits of becoming a Marine. During this period, you should practice with me, and I will train you to be the strongest Marine. On the sea. Grandpa Garp, 3 days have passed, where are we going? On the iconic Marine warship, Beos sat blankly at the bow, looking at the endless sea in front of him, and asked helplessly with his side face. Gotcha. Garp opened his mouth and bit the snack biscuits, responding nonchalantly. Go to an uninhabited island, Beos, don't die next. Ha 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 ha. Knowing that Garp planned to take him to train, Beos did not feel fear, but instead felt expectations in his heart. After all, Garp's strength is the top existence standing on the sea. If he can get the guidance of this Marine legend, his strength will definitely leap forward. Beos, kid, what are you doing? It's time to get off the boat. While Beos was thinking, Garp's voice reached Beos' ears. Looking in the direction of his gaze, the uninhabited island in front of him was covered with dense and tall trees. With the roar of wild beasts, the forest shook and a flock of disturbed birds appeared in the sky. Feeling the roar of the terrifying beasts, there is no doubt that the beasts on this uninhabited island are very different from those in the back mountain of Windmill Village. Beos, the beasts on this island are not the beasts you killed in the back mountain of Windmill Village. Those guys can wipe you out at any time. Are you ready to face death? Garp said with a wicked smile on his face. Rustle. However, before Beos could react, the forest in front of him suddenly made a violent noise. Beos' face sank, his eyes stared at the front, and he was very alert. Have you been noticed? It seems that we don't have to throw you directly into the territory of those beasts. At the same time, Garp also stared at the jungle in front of him, with a smile on his face. Suddenly, in the restless jungle in front, a wild boar with elephant-like tusks, which was tens of meters tall, rushed out. Hee, it just so happens that I haven't had dinner yet. Garp touched his fists and raised his iron fists like sandbags, eager to try, but his face suddenly darkened the next second. Roar! The huge wild boar with tusks roared, opened its bloody mouth and bit Beos. Hey, Beos, don't be stunned. Garp saw this. Anxiety appeared on his face, and he raised his iron fist to rescue Beos. After all, facing the sudden attack of this beast tens of meters tall, Beos, who was only 8 years old, must have been frightened by this beast. Buzz! Just as the beast was about to bite Beos suddenly raised his head, his eyes became cold and fierce. A flash of red light flashed across his dark eyes, and his momentum burst out in an instant. Boom! A terrifying pressure wave swept past, and the beast that was about to devour Beos instantly stopped in its tracks. The next second, boom! The eyes that were originally full of bloodthirstiness turned into white eyes, and the huge body trembled a few times, and fell heavily to the ground, completely losing all consciousness. This is Conqueror's Haki. Garp's eyes widened, staring blankly at the beast lying unconscious in front of Beos, muttering in disbelief. He didn't expect that the 8-year-old kid in front of him had awakened the king's talent that only one person in a million people had awakened. Not only that, what shocked Garp even more was that the Conqueror's Haki released by Beos was only for that beast. You should know that the pressure released by people who have just awakened Conqueror's Haki is undoubtedly an unconscious explosion. It is impossible to accurately control Conqueror's Haki, and it is simply impossible to distinguish between friend and foe. Only with the improvement of spirit and one's own courage can one control the release of Conqueror's Haki to accurately control the enemy. But Beos was able to awaken Conqueror's Haki at the age of only 8, and at the same time, he could accurately control Conqueror's Haki. Even Garp, who has experienced countless strongmen, has never heard of it. Even he, Roger, Whitebeard, and Sengoku, the old boy, could not do what Beos did. At this moment, he finally understood why the red-haired guy gave the big sword, Thunder God, to Beos. This kid is simply a monster. Just when Garp was completely shocked, Beos on the other side ignored the dazed Garp. Instead, he jumped onto the beast, reached out and took off the big sword, Thunder God, from its back. Under the sharp blade, the beast was split into two. He lit a bonfire, put the barbecue on the rack, and took out the seasoning from his pocket, waiting for the next barbecue feast. After all these operations, Garp, who had been silent, suddenly laughed. Ha 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 ha, Beos, you really surprised me. At the age of 8, he awakened the king's talent and could accurately control the release of Conqueror's Haki. From the fact that he split the beast into two, Beos' talent in swordsmanship is also very terrifying. With such a terrifying talent and understanding, he will definitely be a Marine Admiral in the future, and he might even be able to pull Sengoku down from the position of Marshal. Beos, who was sitting by the campfire in the distance and eating barbecue, felt the chill coming from behind, and subconsciously turned his head to look, and saw Garp's weird smile, and his young body shuddered. Ka, Grandpa Garp, do you want to eat? Garp was not polite, sitting opposite Beos, picked up the barbecue and showed it off, and spoke vaguely. Beos, do you want to become a Marine like Grandpa? Grandpa promises that with your talent, it won't be long before you reach the naval headquarters, and your rank will be the same as Grandpa's, Vice Admiral of the headquarters. By then, you will have a lot of Marine subordinates under your command, driving a cool dog-head warship, and maintaining world peace on the sea with justice. By the way, there are many beautiful girls in the headquarters, like Hina under Crane, and Momoshiki, who are all beauties picked out of 100. Listening to Garp's non-stop chattering, Beos' mouth twitched, and he scratched his ears, showing helplessness. Is this still the legendary strongest Marine Garp? Why do I feel like he is fooling a little kid like me? If I hadn't been reborn, I really wouldn't have been fooled by this old man. Grandpa Garp, I'm only 8 years old this year, I'm not old enough to fall in love. And, beautiful girls, not only in Marine, but also on the sea. What nonsense are you talking about, kid? I'm telling you, those on the sea are all Tyrannosaurus. Garp was so excited that he reached out and grabbed Beos in his hand, and gave him a loving education. I'm not talking nonsense, Grandpa Garp. Shanks said at the beginning that there are all kinds of beauties on the sea, which are no worse than the naval headquarters you mentioned. Beos didn't agree with Garp's statement. He ate the barbecue in his hand, doing his own thing, and said provocatively. It's that guy red hair again. When I go to New World, I will beat him into a pig's head. Not only Luffy was brainwashed by him, but even Beos, the kid, has a problem with his thinking. Hearing this, Garp was so angry that he clenched his fists. His hatred for red hair Shanks became more and more terrifying. He wanted to abandon Beos and go to New World immediately. Seeing Garp was completely furious, Beos showed an imperceptible smile. The reason why Beos deliberately angered Garp was to let Garp and himself practice actual combat. Although he had the blessing of Heaven-Defying, he didn't have to worry about Haki and swordsmanship, but he was still far behind in actual combat. At the same time, Beos' physique could be improved faster under extreme actual combat. No matter how many inferior ideas the red-haired guy instilled in you, I will correct you today. Wake up, Beos. Garp raised his iron fist, his body sank suddenly, and the ground began to shatter in an instant. With a roar, his whole body burst out towards Beos like a cannonball. Marine 6 styles one shave. So fast. Seeing the iron fist approaching in an instant, Beos' eyes widened, and he quickly pulled out the big sword thunder on his back, holding it tightly with both hands to block himself. Ding! The sound of steel resounded, and the iron fist collided with the thunder god, and a cloud of dust and gravel was instantly raised under their feet. Huh, can you resist my iron fist head-on? Garp looked at the big sword thunder god blocking his proud iron fist, and a flash of surprise flashed in his eyes. Although he had long known Beos' talent in swordsmanship, in the collision at this moment, Garp clearly felt the strong sword intent emanating from Beos' body. This scene was far beyond Garp's expectations. He originally thought that Beos' talent in Conqueror's Haki was terrifying enough. But now it seems that he still underestimated Beos. HMPH. It seems that I have to be a little more serious, Beos. This inferior swordsmanship alone can't stop my iron fist. Feel the iron fist of my love. Pop. The next second, the iron fists that were held against each other were wrapped in the black armament Haki. Under the strong absolute force, the sharp blade hummed, and Beos' hands began to tremble. Bang! Suddenly, the black iron fist instantly broke all of Beos' defenses and hit Beos' chest. Puff! The severe pain from the chest made Beos spit out a mouthful of blood, and his body flew backwards at a very fast speed and fell into the sea. Bang! However, Garp did not intend to stop there. With the sound of harsh stomping, Garp's figure appeared like a residual image above the sea where Beos fell. Raise the iron fist wrapped in black armor and hit it. Gurgle, gurgle, this old man is really merciless. Fortunately, the armor color was wrapped at the critical moment, otherwise the punch just now would have been broken by the old man. Beos, who was smashed into the sea, reached out and touched his chest that was almost sunken, complaining in pain. Hey, is this going to end? You really don't treat me like an 8-year-old kid. Beos saw Garp on the sea through the seawater, and was about to launch an attack. One sword style return. Jung. Seeing this, Beos was frightened and quickly grasped the thunder guard with both hands. A strong sword intent suddenly rose around him, and he slashed at the armament color impact that was rushing towards him. The light blue sharp slash forced the surrounding seawater to retreat, and it quickly broke through the sea surface and collided with the armament color impact. Boom boom. The roar resounded, and the sea surface was lifted up by the power of the explosion. The strong wind whistled, and many trees on the island were blown down at this moment. Looking at the sudden sharp slash that offset his attack, Garp's eyes showed surprise and astonishment. If he guessed correctly, it has only been a few months since the red-haired guy came to Windmill Village. Beos was able to practice swordsmanship and slash in such a short time. Sure enough, such a good seedling must have his mind completely corrected and become the strongest marine like me. Hee, continue to enjoy the iron fist that I love. Beos. Garp raised his iron fist wrapped in armament Haki, stepped on Moonwalk, and punched Beos who just emerged from the sea. Beos was not to be outdone, and rushed forward with both hands holding the thunder guard. Jung jung jung. Bang bang. But the final result was bang. Ah, you old man have no martial ethics, you come to cheat, to sneak attack me, an 8-year-old child. Ha 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 ha, a real battle. There is no such thing as sneak attack. Beos, accept the correct education of this old man. Bang. With the last loud noise from the island, the battle finally stopped. Hoo-hoo. Die old man, I will take revenge one day. In the pit, Beos was breathing heavily, and the pain from his whole body filled his brain, making it difficult for him to move. He could only whisper and curse to vent. Garp sat by the campfire and processed the beast meat that Beos had decomposed on the rack. Although the slashing is not very good, the meat is cut quite neatly, Beos. Ha 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 ha. Garp deliberately raised his voice so that Beos, who was lying in the pit, could hear it. Don't be complacent, old man. Sooner or later, I will pick up a knife and chop you. Facing the humiliation, Beos struggled to stand up, but the pain made it impossible for him to do so. He could only grit his teeth and shout. Sure enough, Garp's iron fist is really not covered. It feels like the whole body is falling apart. Beos, who was beaten by Garp, was not surprised at all. After all, the combat power of the old man in front of him was the ceiling of the pirate world. Even the former pirate King Roger was chased around the world by Garp without exception. Beos exhaled a foul breath. Even though he was in a mess, he smiled. After this actual battle, his inner goal had been achieved. The next step is to integrate the actual combat experience and improve his own physical fitness. You're still a long way from that, kid. When you can conquer the beasts on this island without relying on Conqueror's Haki, let's talk about it. Garp glanced at Beos, who had crawled out of the pit, and his eyes were full of appreciation, and he teased. Beos, who had consumed a lot of physical energy, staggered back to the campfire, looked at the barbecue in front of him, and stuffed it into his mouth frantically. Under Garp's shocked gaze, the huge beast that was tens of meters tall disappeared at a speed visible to the naked eye. Ah, kid, this piece of barbecue belongs to me. Stuff your mouth for me. The gray night light reflected on the dark sea surface, flashing a swimming white light. Beside the campfire on the coast, Beos, who had long been exhausted, was sleeping soundly with a belly like a huge balloon. Next to him was the skeleton of the beast that had been eaten into a skeleton. Garp looked at Beos silently, with bubbles on his nose, and whispered in a low voice. I wonder if my decision is right or wrong. While he was shocked by Beos' talent, he was more concerned about Beos' calmness, thoughts and sophistication like an adult. As early as Beos deliberately stimulated himself, forced the shot, Garp was shaken. The boy is likely to make the old man a pig's head. Tong tong. Tianming. Boarding. Beos opened his eyes and moved his body subconsciously, but felt that his body had changed. Your understanding is heaven-defying. After fighting with all your strength, your physical strength has changed, and your strength and physique have doubled. Looking at the virtual panel that appeared in the void of his mind, Beos was stunned. The condition of his body reminded him of the Saiyans who were facing death and recovery in the anime. He smiled slightly and murmured, "What a pleasant surprise." Garp rubbed his hands, grinned, and teased Beos. Yo, little kid is awake. Are you ready for the correct education of Grandpa's love? Beos was stunned, touched his already shriveled stomach, and made a suggestion. Grandpa Garp, we haven't had breakfast yet. But before Beos finished speaking, Garp raised his iron fist with Armament Haki and rushed towards Beos. Don't underestimate me, old man. Seeing this, Beos didn't care so much, and quickly pulled out the big sword Leiyu from his back and rushed forward. Dang, the fist and the sword collided, and the power they created shook the coast. Hoo-hoo. After a series of strong confrontations, Beos finally ran out of energy and fell heavily on the beach, closing his eyes and breathing heavily. Huh, this kid is stronger than yesterday. Garp retracted his iron fist, his face showing a very serious expression, and looked at Beos closely. He wanted to know the changes in Beos' body, but he never got the answer. In just one night, Beos' overall strength doubled. Even if you look through the entire marine, you can't find such a terrifying growth rate. This is simply incredible. Thinking of this, Garp became more determined to train Beos to be the strongest marine in the marine. Perhaps the future pattern of the ocean will be completely rewritten by Beos. How about Beos? Do you want to follow me to the naval headquarters? Looking at Beos lying on the beach, panting, Garp coaxed him again. If you agree to become a marine, Grandpa will teach you another Haki that I just used. Garp smiled evilly, trying to arouse Beos' curiosity and make him agree to become a marine. With the blessing of Armament Haki, the slashes you launch can be strengthened by several times. However, before Garp could finish his words, he was interrupted by Beos. No, isn't it just Armament Haki? Pop. Beos stood up again from the ground, holding the big sword, Thunder God, tightly in both hands. The next second, he was suddenly covered by a dark cloud. Hey, is this true? This kid can even use Armament Haki. Garp was stunned when he saw the sharp blade of Thunder God completely covered by Armament Haki. He thought that he could use Beos' desire to become stronger and trick him into becoming a marine, and decided to teach him how to awaken Armament Haki. Who knew that Beos would treat him like a clown? After a while, monster. Garp finally came back to his senses from the extreme shock, and seeing Beos' disgusted look, he couldn't help but curse inwardly. I have a pair of iron fists, and I have beaten countless strong men in the sea. I am even known as Iron Fist Garp, but I was actually looked down upon by a little brat. Where can Garp put his face? He must take back his proud dignity in front of this little brat. Garp touched his chin and pondered for a while, and suddenly thought of something, and a smug look appeared on the corner of his mouth. That's right, since Beos, this kid, has awakened Armament Haki, then I will show my trump card to this kid who looks down on me. What is the strongest attack with gorgeous special effects? HMPH. Don't think that you can show off in front of me just because you have awakened Armament Haki. Grandpa will let you see now what is the strongest attack that stands at the top of the world. Garp stared at Beos and grinned, and a flash of red light flashed in his eyes. Buzz. In an instant, a terrifying pressure like a monstrous sky, accompanied by dark purple lightning, swept in all directions. The blue sky was covered by dark clouds at this moment, and thunder roared unconsciously. Ha! The roar was deafening, and the dark purple lightning that was raging around seemed to obey orders and kept circling Garp's iron fist that had already turned into a purple-black iron fist. ZZ. As Beos raised his hand to resist the raging pressure, his eyes were fixed on the terrifying power gathered on Garp's fist. This is the critical point of skillfully controlling Conqueror's Haki. Garp looked at Beos with a shocked expression, and couldn't help showing a hint of pride at the corner of his mouth. Hey, kid, look at this, this is the real skill of Conqueror's Haki. Swoosh. Then his feet sank, and his figure appeared high above the sea. Make sure that Beos, who is on the beach in the distance, will not be affected by this blow. Then he grinned, raised his dark red fist wrapped in purple-black lightning, and slammed it into the sea. Roar. At this moment, the terrifying power imprisoned in the dark red iron fist seemed to be freed from the abyss monster, roaring with pressure. Pop. The shock wave with dark purple lightning swept through the atmosphere and swept everything around. Boom. In an instant, the balanced sea was completely broken, and it sank like origami, cutting off everything. Countless aquatic creatures, including the huge sea kings, were completely blasted into blood mist by this violent shock wave before they could escape. Galaxy impact. Sure. Beos looked at the sea in the distance that was sunken by the terrifying shock wave, and the dark red lightning remaining in the air on the sea surface. His eyes widened and murmured. Galaxy impact. Isn't this the move that Garp launched in the original work in his previous life to rescue his apprentice Kobe and went to Blackbeard's base camp? At that time, Garp rushed into the sky of Beehive Island alone, using the strongest Conqueror's Haki technique, and smashed the entire town with one punch. This is also what Teacher Kaido once said, above all power, tyrant. It's really a terrifying power, but I can do it now. However, according to his young body now, I am afraid that after using this attack, his body will be completely overdrawn. Hee hee ha ha ha, how about the little ghost? You are scared by this old man's attack. Oh, by the way, I have a stronger move than this one. After returning to the beach, Garp shook his shoulders and looked at Beos, who was still stunned in the same place, and couldn't help but said proudly. Do you want to promise Grandpa to go to Naval Headquarters to become a Marine? Grandpa may be in a good mood, how about teaching you how to practice tyrant? Garp was very proud. Although this move was not his strongest move, he showed the terrifying power of Conqueror's Haki, and he didn't believe that Beos, the little ghost, would not be tempted. Facing Garp's constant brainwashing in his ear, Beos did not respond, but held the big sword, Thunder God, and slowly walked towards the sea. First, Beos stopped and faced the sea that had just returned to calm. He held Thunder God tightly with one hand and moved it. The next second, the black-armed color covered the sharp blade. Boom. Garp behind him crossed his arms and watched Beos' movements. He shook his head to interrupt the doubts that had just arisen in his heart. Could this kid? It shouldn't be possible. The next second, Beos' eyes flashed a red light, and his momentum continued to surge. Buzz. Boom boom. The powerful Conqueror's Haki and dark red lightning, like Garp before, burst out suddenly, constantly rushing to the surroundings. At the same time, the sky above was covered with dark clouds, and thunder was restless, raging towards the island below and the surrounding sea. At this time, Beos closed his eyes and held the big sword Ryu tightly, recalling Shanks's swinging movements and the control of this power in the picture. ZZ. The blade of Ryu was horizontal, and the dark red lightning that was originally raging around seemed to be guided and kept entwining around the dark blade of Ryu. In the end, all the dark red lightning was concentrated on the big sword Ryu in Benos's hand. Benos's body sank, muttered, and swung the black sword Ryu in his hand, and the momentum reached the point of approach. Black sword style entanglement. ZZ. Garp behind him looked at Benos's Conqueror's Haki, which kept pouring into the big sword Ryu, and was immediately shocked on the spot. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.